The Alpha's Bound Sin. Omegaverse Werewolf Shifter Romance Audiobook. Written by Reinhardt. Chapter 1 The False Alpha. The sky above the eastern border was a seeping wound, gray, low-hanging, heavy with the scent of old blood and gunpowder. Somewhere in the shrouded ruins of the corrupted wolf encampment, screams still echoed, swallowed quickly by the rot of damp stone and iron-tainted air. Auren didn't flinch. He moved like a shadow given breath, silent, balanced, patient. His boots left no mark in the soot-laced soil, and the coat he wore, black with the faint shine of officer leather, was spotless despite the filth around him. Silver eyes gleamed under the lowered brim of his hood, catching the faintest flicker of movement ahead. A flickering lantern behind tattered curtains. Target confirmed. The corrupted Alpha, once a decorated sentinel of the Northern Guard, had defected 6 moons ago, taking with him a cache of pheromone stimulants and forbidden data maps from Fongspire. He'd buried himself here, among crumbling barracks and scavenger gangs, protected by nothing but his rotting aura and the frayed loyalty of madmen. Until tonight, Auren inhaled once, slow, deliberate, and released. With the faintest pressure of thought, he summoned the scent. Dominance. The air bloomed with it, rich, bitter, unmistakable. It rolled over the outpost like a winter storm, subtle as silk and sharp as a blade. A wave of unease swept through the outpost. From the shadows, mutters rose. Somewhere behind a cracked wall, a lesser wolf whimpered and dropped to his knees. Inside the Alpha's den, something shifted. A low growl. Metal scraped. Auren was already through the door. The defector surged up from his cot, teeth bared, neck glistening with sweat. He staggered from the overwhelming force in the room, pupils blown wide. "WH? Who the fuck are you?" He never finished the sentence. Auren's blade slid across his throat with the grace of a lover's kiss, soft, final, unhesitating. Blood spilled in a neat arc. The Alpha's hands clawed at nothing, falling like broken wings. Auren stepped back as the body collapsed, his expression unreadable. The fake Alpha scent still lingered in the air, heavy and beautiful, crafted to perfection. A lie that killed. Clean. His voice was low, crisp, devoid of satisfaction. He wiped the blade once on his sleeve. Not a speck of blood remained. A sudden pressure pressed against the back of his skull, like an icy finger tracing the stem of his brain. The link flared open. Commander Ruln. "You were beautiful, Thalosar." He didn't even scream. Auren said nothing aloud. Silence was his loyalty. Still, the thought echo of his breath carried through the tether. Target eliminated. There was a pause. A slow, amused hum trickled through the mental bond. "You are our perfect design, Auren. The balance, the silence, the scent that makes even Alphas kneel. Your next path is clear." The air around Auren cooled. He knew the name before it was spoken. Kade. The link snapped shut like a cell door. Auren stood in the ruinous quiet, listening to the blood drip into the floorboards behind him. His pulse did not rise. His hands did not shake. The scent in the air had already begun to dissipate, evaporating like the last notes of a song no one remembered hearing. He turned and walked out without a sound. Up on the ridge, where the trees thinned and the wind cut like a knife through wolf hide, Kade crouched low among the frost-bitten brush, his wolf form coiled in muscle and watchfulness. His coat was the dark brown of scorched pine, speckled with ash gray along the spine. His eyes glinted a brutal gold, narrowed with suspicion. He had watched the whole thing. The kill had been clean, too clean. The scent had been right, the kind of rich, feral weight that forced lesser wolves to submit out of instinct. But Kade's nose had twitched before the blade ever moved. His hackles had risen for reasons his brain couldn't name. The rhythm was wrong. The air bent around the stranger's scent like it didn't quite belong. It mimicked dominance like a ghost mimicked breath. Kade shifted, slow, powerful, and let the wolf fall back into skin. He rose to his feet, bare-chested, the ridged scar across his shoulder catching the faint moonlight. A cold wind tugged at his trousers, biting deep. Still, he stared down into the crumbling camp below, where the killer walked calmly through the gate as if death were a crown he wore. His pheromones, Kade murmured, smelled too perfect. He clenched his jaw. No heartbeat, no soul. He turned and vanished into the trees without a sound, the cold swallowing his footsteps. Chapter 2: The Howl That Smelled Wrong. The forest did not welcome him. It bristled like a living thing, branches curved like claws, bark peeling in scar-rough streaks, and frost clinging to the ground like a memory that refused to melt. The silence here wasn't quiet. It listened. Whisper Hollow, they called it, a name spoken through bitten lips and half a breath, as if sound itself might stir what slumbered in the bones of the trees. Auren Thalosar moved through it like smoke in reverse, each step precise, controlled, a ghost slipping back into a body. He bore the weight of his coat like armor, its fur-lined collar framing a face too clean, too expressionless for the dirt-stained world around him. The glint of silver in his eyes did not reflect the moonlight, consumed it. From afar, one might have mistaken him for a soldier disgraced, broad-shouldered but silent, too calm for a man who had supposedly lost everything. His scent, carefully diluted with something synthetically spiced and faintly scorched, whispered of alpha blood, shame, and desperation. An exile searching for purpose. A once mighty blade dulled by time and failure. That was the story. The truth slithered beneath it, coiled tight and ready to strike. Auren didn't look up when the first howl cracked the distance like a whip. He simply paused, tilted his head, and exhaled. Not fear, not surprise, calculation. He crouched in a single, fluid motion, palm skimming the frostbitten moss. His breath came steady even as the second cry tore through the trees, closer now, with that garbled, broken muzzle edge that meant hunger twisted too long into madness. Auren's fingers brushed the hilt of the blade hidden under his coat, leather wrapped and still warm from body heat. He didn't draw it. Not yet. The ground trembled. Not a quake, but a rhythm. For pause. Not a scout. A lone feral. Then the crackle of brush breaking. Then silence. Then a blur of gray and red and foam exploded toward him from the tree-line. Auren moved sideways, not backward, angling his body like a mirror reflecting death. The feral's claws swiped where his throat had been a heartbeat ago, catching nothing but air and snowflakes. He pivoted, slashed. There was no warning growl, no shift in expression, only the metallic scent of sliced flesh. The wolf howled as its foreleg hit the earth 5 feet from its body. Auren stepped in. His dagger found the soft place beneath the jaw, twisting up, not to kill, to silence. The body fell heavy and twitching, steam rising from the exposed muscle. Blood sprayed in a wide arc but missed Auren entirely. He didn't flinch. He looked down at the wolf for exactly 3 seconds, then reached into his coat, pulled out a blackened cloth and wiped the blade clean. He didn't bother with ceremony or mercy. He hadn't been trained for those. From the shadows beyond the thicket, a pair of eyes narrowed. Kade Thurrow had been watching long enough to know when a kill was real and when it was rehearsed. What he had just seen wasn't a scuffle. It was an execution. The figure before him, this supposed lost alpha soldier, hadn't trembled, hadn't scented the air like prey, hadn't even checked behind him after the kill, as if the forest owed him no explanation. Yet something was off. Kade's nostrils flared as he stepped silently between trees, low to the earth, all muscle and darkness and scent. The stranger's pheromones were carefully layered. A burnt cedar edge meant to trigger submissive instincts in lesser wolves. But beneath that, Kade frowned. There was absence, like the lingering echo of a howl that had never been born. No true alpha pulse, no omega bloom, just like a hollow gland projection. Kade muttered to himself, voice low, graveled with mistrust. Almost like they carved the instinct out and painted on another. The feral's corpse bled silently behind Auren, staining the ground. The stranger crouched again, this time collecting something, perhaps a claw, a tooth, a piece of evidence to later prove his worth. Kade remained still. That scent, he knew it from somewhere. But his body didn't react the way it should have. His instincts, so finely tuned, so rarely wrong, refused to settle. This was not a stranger seeking shelter. This was a ghost, wearing a face. But even ghosts had to breathe. Auren pressed forward once the silence resumed its hold. He knew the shadows were watching. He let them. Every step he took deeper into the forest brought him closer to the crumbling perimeter where the war had left its mark. Here, old transport pylons lay broken like the ribs of dead giants. Their once shimmering energy nodes now blackened and cold. The ruins of the old transfer station loomed ahead, half buried in snow and disuse. But not abandoned. Not completely. Auren knelt beside the fractured concrete and set down a small vial, pressing a finger to its seal. The synthetic scent inside would mimic the hormonal trace of a desperate alpha, a blend of shame, exile, and the tiniest hint of submissive plea. Let them think he was here seeking purpose. Let them believe he was too wounded to threaten. That was the bait. He would bleed 100 masks if it meant reaching him. Kade, the wolf who had refused to be owned. The alpha who had never tried to own him. Auren rose, wiping his hands on the inside of his coat. Blood, frost, and chemical residue vanished like they'd never been. He turned his face to the sky and howled. A low, fractured sound, raw where it should be smooth. It sang of loneliness, not power. Of a soldier too long on the run. Of a wolf who had forgotten how to be part of a pack. It was a lie beautifully told. And somewhere far beyond the treeline, a scarred alpha narrowed his eyes and whispered into the cold. This isn't how Omegas hunt. His voice was quiet, curious, then colder. A whisper turned blade. But that's not an alpha's heart. Chapter 3 In the Lair of the Mad Wolf. The wind shifted just before dawn. It came like a whisper through the frostbitten ruins, curling through the skeleton trees and across the broken bones of what had once been a royal hunting ground. Now it was nothing more than scorched soil and ash, charred reminders of a kingdom that had burned long before anyone stopped pretending it was worth saving. And still, even now, the air carried a warning. You don't belong here. Auren Thalosar walked as if he didn't hear it. His boots crunched softly over dried leaves, and his coat, ragged at the hem and dusted with bloodless soot, moved with the precision of a blade sheathed in silence. He looked the part. A fallen alpha, wandering the edges of a world that had long since forgotten his name, which was exactly what he needed them to believe. He'd entered Kade's territory 12 hours earlier, on foot, alone, without invitation. No perimeter traps had been triggered. No warning shots fired. That was the first sign. The second came when he reached the outermost ruins of what the maps had once called the Rotfang estate, now reduced to jagged stone outlines and rusted iron gates torn from their hinges. The third was the scent. It was faint, dormant, but present, powerfully male, bone-deep and primal. The kind of scent that didn't demand submission, it expected it. Auren stopped just beyond the cracked archway, snow coating the exposed cobblestone beneath him. He lowered his hood. The silver of his eyes shimmered beneath the rising light. He inhaled once, deep, and then released. What rolled from his body was deliberate. Alpha pheromones. Subdued. Submissive. Seeking shelter. Not enough to challenge. Not enough to deceive. Just enough to whisper. I have nowhere else to go. It was dangerous. It was calculated. It was bait. Auren waited. The wind returned, stronger now, carrying with it the unmistakable pressure of a presence moving in the brush behind him. Not charging. Not sneaking. Circling. His fingers twitched at his sides, but he didn't reach for the blade beneath his coat. Not yet. Twigs cracked. Snow shifted. Then silence. Then, a shape emerged from the blackened remains of the outer wall. Not a shadow. A wolf. But only for a heartbeat. It shifted mid-step, and what remained standing in its place was a man, or something that had once been shaped like one. broad-shouldered, shirtless, with remnants of torn fabric clinging to his frame like warnings. His skin was painted in old scars and new weather, sun-worn and ash-slick, and his eyes, those eyes, not golden like most alphas, not red, not even dark. They were gray, storm gray, like something that had never been tamed long enough to take on color. And they were fixed on him. Kade, the outlaw alpha, the last relic of unbroken instinct, the wolf who had refused both crown and chain. He said nothing. He walked closer. His feet made no sound in the snow. Auren held still as Kade approached, watching the way his muscles moved beneath the filth-streaked skin, like a predator fresh from kill. And still he didn't speak, just circled. Once, twice, a third time, slow, deliberate, as though committing every part of him to memory. Then he stopped, very close enough that Auren could see the way the cold turned the alpha's breath to fog, the way it curled near his collarbone, the faint scent of iron and burned pine. Auren held his breath without meaning to. Kade tilted his head, sniffed once, and then leaned in. His mouth hovered just above Auren's shoulder. His nose dragged, barely, over the shell of his ear. Still he said nothing. Auren's fingers curled into fists. There was no tremble, but something inside him shifted. Kade's hand brushed against his coat. Not in threat, not in want, in recognition. And then, without warning, he stepped back. Just one step, enough to cool the space between them, though the air still shimmered with something tangible. Still silent, Kade began to turn away. His voice came only when his back was to him. Low, ragged, like gravel torn loose from old roads. You know how to make yourself smell like an alpha. A pause, a heartbeat. But you forgot to teach your heart how to lie brave. Then he vanished into the ruins. Auren didn't move for a long time. Not when the wind stirred the trees. Not when the silence reclaimed the air. Not even when his lungs began to burn. He only realized he'd been holding his breath when the first exhale left him too quickly, too sharply, like something had cracked without warning. He pressed a hand to his chest. His heartbeat was steady, but not brave. He looked up toward the place where Kade had disappeared. Snow was already erasing the footprints. The taste of him still lingered in the air. And for the first time in a long, long time, Auren wasn't sure the mask was still on. Chapter 4, The Pulse Beneath the Mask. The palace ruin didn't sleep. It settled, occasionally, stone groaning under the weight of time, wind sighing through broken rafters, snow whispering against the shutters, but never truly rested. Like the wolves who still haunted its bones, it kept one eye open. Auren found the old bathhouse in what might have once been a southern wing. Now the roof had partially collapsed, and moonlight spilled through the rafters in fractured beams, painting silver across the cracked tile. The walls still smelled faintly of cedar resin and mineral salts, ghosts of some forgotten ritual. The pool itself remained intact, miraculously so. Water seeped from some underground source, naturally warm, barely steaming in the cold air. A place like this should have been claimed, boarded, sacred, but no one had touched it, no one except him. Auren set down his coat with slow precision. Beneath it, his shirt clung to him, damp with cold sweat and bloodless battle. The encounter with Kade still hummed against his skin, like a second heartbeat that didn't know it had missed a step. He tugged the shirt over his head, baring pale skin to the cold air, muscles taut and cut like weaponry. His scars were minimal, unnaturally so. Clean, surgical, engineered. He stepped into the water. It accepted him silently. Warmth wrapped around his calves, thighs, waist, chest, until he sank to his collarbones and finally breathed. It should have eased something, loosened the tight coil under his ribs, drowned out the last of Kade's voice. But you forgot to teach your heart how to lie brave. But the warmth only made it worse. Here, surrounded by silence, he couldn't pretend his pulse wasn't climbing, that his skin didn't remember the brush of a scarred shoulder, the press of a mouth near his throat, the scent of frost and old pine beneath the skin. He tilted his head back, eyes closed, forcing himself to breathe slow. One breath, two. Then something shifted. A drop of dark red bloomed on the surface of the water near his collarbone. Tiny, crimson, perfect, blood, but not his, not feral. Alpha. His eyes opened, narrow, alert, but he didn't move. He let the water still, watched the red circle widen into a ring, then vanish. A whisper of scent followed it. Not strong, not meant to trigger, just enough to exist. Auren froze. Behind him something moved. Not a footstep, not even a ripple in the water. Just presence. Kade. Auren didn't turn. He didn't speak. But his body knew. A breath stirred the back of his neck, warm despite the chill air, tinged with something rougher. Something known. A single fingertip, calloused, steady, touched the center of his spine. Drew down, slowly, tracing vertebrae like counting ribs in prayer. Then a voice. Low, velvet, measured. You didn't miss a beat. Auren's hand twitched beneath the water. Perfect pacing, perfect control. The finger stopped between his shoulder blades. But you haven't taken a real breath since you stepped in. Auren turned. Too fast. His hand came up, slicing through the water toward Kade's throat. But the angle was wrong. His footing slipped, betrayed by the stone slick with moss, and he lost balance. He fell. The water swallowed him in a rush, warm and blinding. When he surfaced, gasping, Kade hadn't moved. He stood just beyond the edge of the pool, shirtless, half-shadowed, eyes sharp, jaw tense, scars like poetry down his ribs. He didn't reach out. He didn't smile. He just looked. At Auren. At the slip in control. At the crack in the ice. Then, after a long breath, Kade said softly, "Too perfect a hunter never grows a wolf soul." Auren's fingers gripped the edge of the stone. Water slid down his shoulders in sleek rivulets. He didn't respond, because he couldn't. Not when everything inside him, trained, coded, engineered, was thrumming to the wrong rhythm. Not when his gland had pulsed. Just once. But enough. Kade turned without waiting. The scent of him lingered like embers. Earthy, cold, undeniable. Auren stared at the water. Where the drop had been. He no longer knew if it had been bait. Or proof. Chapter 5, The Bone Knife Ritual. The courtyard bled moonlight like an old wound. Broken tiles shimmered faintly beneath the snow-laced dirt. And the half-fallen statues that once lined the perimeter of the old training arena now watched in silence. Blind gods carved from a better lie. Auren Thalosar stepped into the ring with the calm of someone born to die beautifully. His boots crunched once against the stone. Then silence. Around him, 2 sentry alphas flanked the perimeter, broad-backed, armor-belted, their eyes wary but curious. One of them rolled his neck, joints popping like warning shots. The other licked his lower lip like he could already taste submission in the air. "Volunteering for combat trials?" One of them drawled, tone edged with derision. Didn't think exiled alphas still knew how to bleed. Auren's hand drifted slowly to the bone-handled blade at his hip. He didn't answer. The second guard stepped forward, flexing his knuckles. "Or maybe you're just hoping we'll bite before we cut." A low laugh passed between them. They circled. Auren didn't move. His shoulders stayed relaxed, head bowed slightly, like prey pretending to prey. Until, the moment the first guard lunged, he twisted. No warning. No hesitation. The bone knife slid from its sheath with a whisper. It was curved, ivory-etched, the sort of weapon made from myth and marrow. He spun low, used the man's momentum against him, and sliced behind the knee. The guard buckled with a shout, but before his howl reached the sky, Auren had already stepped sideways, caught the second alpha's wrist mid-punch, and drove the blade in. Between the ribs. Fast. Precise. Not deep enough to kill, but deep enough to remind him he could've. Blood darkened the man's tunic. Auren leaned in close, voice a breath. "I don't bleed for men who bark." Then he stepped back. The 2 guards fell to their knees. one hissing, the other gasping, both silenced by a truth they hadn't expected. This wasn't some exile seeking pity. This was something that had forgotten how to lose. Above the arena, half shrouded by tattered banners and the slanted shadow of the watchtower, Kade stood with one hand resting on the hilt of his own blade. He'd watched every move, every pivot, every slash. His jaw didn't move. His expression stayed unreadable, until the knife met rib. Then, just faintly, too faint for anyone but the wind to notice, Kade's mouth curved. Not in amusement, in warning. "You really want to fool us, ghost wolf?" he murmured to himself. "You're doing a damn good job." That night, the moon dipped behind cloud. Snow fell in slow, deliberate spirals, as if the sky were being careful not to interrupt something below. The ruins of the bone altar sat deeper in the forest, half swallowed by earth and root. What remained was a circle of scorched stones, charred ash, and brittle teeth buried like offerings in cracked bowls. Auren waited in its center, alone. He could feel the ghosts here, feel the weight of centuries of sacrifice, the snarled threads of oaths never kept. The altar did not ask for loyalty. It demanded silence, blood, the things wolves gave when they ran out of names. He didn't startle when Kade arrived. The Alpha stepped into the clearing with the soundless grace of a storm already overhead. His coat was gone, his boots mud-soaked. In one hand he carried a cloth-wrapped bundle. He tossed it. The cloth unfurled midair and landed at Auren's feet. Bones, polished white, shaped like fingers. Kade's voice came slow and heavy. "Remains from the last offering made here. Thought you'd like to see what loyalty looks like when it rots." Auren crouched, inspecting the bundle with no expression. The scent of old marrow still clung to it. Faint, bitter. "Did they die well?" he asked softly. Kade tilted his head. His voice was sharper now. "They died for the wrong Alpha." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, with tension, with questions neither of them asked. Finally, Kade stepped closer, his boots grinding bone dust. He gestured toward Auren's collarbone. "You're not afraid to dirty that gland of yours, are you? It's still clean." Auren met his gaze, unflinching. "I've never been afraid of pain." "That's not what I asked." Auren didn't blink, didn't flinch, but his fingers did tighten, just once, around the edge of the cloth. Kade watched. He watched too closely, like someone looking through, not at. Then, with a breath like smoke, Kade turned. "You're dangerous, Thalosar, and not just because of the way you hold a knife." "Then why?" Kade didn't stop walking. "Because you wear silence the way most wolves wear teeth. And it makes me want to bite first." Then he was gone. Auren stayed a moment longer, then bent, picked up the bones, and pressed one to the gland at his neck. Just long enough for the ache to settle in. Chapter 6: The Scentless Kiss. The moon hung low and crooked, its light barely grazing the jagged spires of the outpost's southern watchtower. Somewhere below, wind threaded through rusted pipes and half-shuttered vents, carrying with it the faintest trace of crushed sage and ash bark, herbs meant to calm, to sedate. But Auren Thalosar was anything but calm as he stepped into the narrow corridor leading toward Kade's private herb room. It was unlocked, a mistake or a silent challenge. The door gave with a soft groan. Inside, rows of vials blinked with starlight from the slanted skylight above, casting glassy reflections over the carefully labeled tinctures. The air was thick with scent, dried pine resin, fermented root. None of it masked the one thing Auren had come for: D7 inhibitor. He found it on the third shelf, precisely where Kade had kept it last time. A small, unmarked vial, pale green like diluted mint. It was used to numb pheromone response, crucial for Omegas trained to simulate neutrality, or hide in plain sight among alphas. He slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket, careful not to disturb the other bottles. Behind him, the floor creaked. "I thought I locked that door." Auren didn't flinch. The voice was deep, even. Kade's tone was always more observation than accusation. He turned slowly, letting the dim blue light from the skylight slice across his cheekbone as he faced the man who stood at the doorway, arms loose at his sides, expression unreadable. "You must have forgotten," Auren replied, letting a faint smile curl the edge of his mouth. "Or maybe your herbs aren't as precious as they look." Kade's gaze dropped to the pocket where the vial now rested, then returned to Auren's eyes. "You have a habit of walking where you shouldn't." "I've had stranger habits." Auren took a step forward, close enough to smell the heat lingering on Kade's skin, spiced cedar, and that elusive note of storm split air. Kade didn't move. "What is it?" "An old tick," Auren murmured. "Habitual use. Suppresses the noise when it gets too loud in the blood." "A crutch." "A comfort," Auren corrected smoothly. Their eyes locked. Somewhere beyond the stone walls, wind howled through the vents, too wild to be tamed by herb smoke or silence. The scent between them twisted, pulled, laced with tension not yet spoken aloud. And then Auren leaned in, slow, calculated. His fingers ghosted just beneath Kade's jaw, not gripping, merely hovering as if drawing a line that wasn't meant to be crossed, yet already was. "I can prove it," he whispered, tone like glass cracking under velvet. "The inhibitor. It's working." Kade's brows drew in, but he didn't stop him. Auren's lips brushed the curve of his jaw. A single point of heat, soft, breathless. A kiss designed not for want, but for study. Contact test. A dare wrapped in stillness. Kade closed his eyes. Only for a second. Just 1 second. Then the kiss broke. Auren withdrew, slow, like unwinding from a trigger. Kade's lashes lifted. His voice, when it came, was softer than usual, but colder somehow, like water after lightning. "Your kiss," he said, "has no scent." The words sliced, more than they should have. Auren had prepared for suspicion, for interrogation, even violence. But not this. Not a truth too close to the edge of what he could fake. He held his stance, still poised and calm. "That's the point," he said. "No scent, no distraction. Just clean habits and clear heads." But Kade only watched him, too still, too silent, as if listening for something that hadn't been spoken aloud. Auren turned to go, and paused at the door, his back to the alpha who hadn't called his bluff. "Mission protocol," he said, voice steady. "Never trained us for what to do when we had to run." He leaned against the frame just briefly, catching the pulse that had betrayed him under his skin, the way it hammered like it wanted out. Kade said nothing, but the silence between them had shifted. Outside, the night wind dragged colder through the vents. The inhibitor vial pressed against Auren's ribs like a lie sealed in glass. He slipped away down the corridor, boots silent on stone, leaving no scent in his wake, no trail to follow. And yet he knew Kade would follow anyway, because some wolves don't need a scent to hunt. Chapter 7, Where Wolves Don't Sleep. The northern forest didn't rustle like most woods. It shivered. Even under the moon's dim eye, the branches of blackwood verge stood jagged and still, as though they remembered the burn of experiments and the breathless silence of wolves who had never learned to howl. The path along the patrol ridge twisted like a half-forgotten scar, and the trees leaned in too close, watching. Auren Thalosar walked it without breaking stride. His boots made no sound on the frozen earth. The air curled around him, laced with resin and faint ozone. The wind tasted wrong tonight, too sharp, as if some unseen blade had passed through it moments before. He paused at the bend in the trail. Stillness, but not peace. A flicker, barely there. A shadow just past the edge of the thorns. Fast, intentional, too slender for a bear, too high for a fox, too silent for a deer. Not Kade, not pack, pursuers. They'd found him, not directly, no scent trail yet, but their proximity was growing bolder, creeping like mold beneath the bark. Auren's pulse did not spike. He simply adjusted his coat, kept walking. Stay the ghost. Stay the mask. He had made it 10 steps when the call came, low, warm, careless enough to sound like nothing, but carrying purpose under its breath. "Fancy a rooftop tonight?" Auren turned. Kade stood in the lantern glow just beyond the pine gate, a mug in each hand. His posture loose, back leaning against the frame of the outpost's outer watchtower, like the cold hadn't bothered him since birth. His scars were faint beneath his collar, faded but proud. A living contradiction, war-forged and wolf-soft. Auren approached. They didn't speak again until they reached the rooftop, climbing the iron ladder in silence, boots echoing faintly on the rungs. The night spread wide above them, stars like open eyes. The wind tugged at their sleeves, and the crumbling stone beneath them groaned in half-sleep. Kade handed him a mug. It was warm, heavy, smelled of burnt clove and honey root. Auren sipped, didn't thank him. Kade didn't seem to expect it. They sat in silence, backs against the edge wall, legs stretched in opposite directions. Below, the forest pulsed with a quiet too deep for comfort. Minutes passed. Somewhere in the distance, a single howl cut the dark, long, lonely, and raw around the edges. Not a call. A warning. Kade exhaled. No one sleeps well here. Auren didn't answer. Another beat. Then, you're tense tonight. A flick of Auren's silver eyes. We're in a place wolves come to die. That would make anyone alert. Kade tilted his head. You think I'd bring you up here if I meant to throw you off? Auren smiled faintly, but his shoulders didn't ease. You're not the one I'm afraid of. The mug in Kade's hand stopped halfway to his lips. The words hung for a moment. Heavy. Too close. He set the mug down beside him, deliberate. No? Kade asked, voice low. Then what is it? Auren didn't speak at first. He watched the stars instead. Distant, dead things still pretending to glow. Then quietly, I'm afraid of waking up one day and not being the one in control anymore. The wind rushed past, as if even it didn't want to stay between them. Kade looked at him, not sharply, but deeply. Not searching for lies, searching for fractures. You've always been in control, haven't you? Auren didn't blink. That's what they built me for. And that was too much truth. He hadn't meant to say it. The silence that followed wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't dangerous either. It settled like mist, unnamed, unresolved, but not rejected. Kade leaned back again, gazed toward the lake beyond the ridge. The water lay black and still, mirroring nothing. You know, he said, almost conversational. There's something about you that doesn't smell like pack. Auren's fingers tensed around the mug. And yet, you let me stay. Kade's mouth curved. Not a smile. A bruise that hadn't healed right. Some ghosts deserve shelter. They didn't speak again for a while. Just sat. Together. Above the world that didn't sleep. Chapter 8 The Fever That Shouldn't Be. The spring nestled in a fold of the hillside, where stone gave way to moss and the trees gathered more tightly, guarding it like a secret they didn't know how to bury. Auren had found it by instinct, drawn by the hum of warmth beneath the earth and the ache behind his eyes that refused to cool. His hands shook, though he told himself it was the cold. His pulse stuttered too close to his jaw. He crouched by the water's edge, dipping his palm in. Steam rose in thin ribbons from the surface, perfumed by some wild root that pulsed faintly beneath the soil. It smelled of clover and crushed bark, but something else, too sweet, subtle, clinging. He should have recognized it. He should have known that Faran dust, in its uncut form, lingered in the moss like powdered lightning. But Auren had spent his life learning how to feel nothing. So when his skin flushed and his throat dried, he thought only of control, of heat that would pass, of breath that he could slow, of bone that would hold. He stripped to his undershirt and let the water take him, sliding in until it kissed his ribs and wrapped heat along the curve of his spine. His glands pulsed, once, then again, too fast, too real. Auren bit down on the inside of his cheek until copper filled his mouth. He pressed a hand to the back of his neck, as if pressure alone could stop the trickle of scent that threatened to unfurl, soft, nearly imperceptible, but Omega. Panic did not rise. He had been trained past panic. But clarity, sharp and cruel, flared behind his eyes. Not here. Not now. He dragged himself from the spring, drenched and burning, vision swimming. His shirt clung like a second skin, plastered over the heartbeat he could no longer quiet. There was a supply hut nearby, tucked behind the rocks, half forgotten, half claimed. Auren stumbled inside, bolting the door behind him. His fingers shook as he dug through the crates until he found a sliver of rowroot bark and shoved it under his tongue. It wasn't enough. He braced both hands on the wall, sweat slicking his back. Stillness didn't come. Only heat. Only scent. Only danger. He bit down again, this time on his own tongue. Harder. Blood ran down his chin in a fine line. He stayed upright. Barely. By the time his body stopped trying to betray him, it was nearly dawn. The door creaked open before the sun could fully rise. Auren jerked up from where he'd slumped beside the shelf. One blade still hidden in his boot. Glands sealed down by sheer force of will. Kade stepped inside. He paused only a moment before the scent hit him, so faint it could have been imagined. But wolves didn't imagine scent. Kade didn't say anything right away. His eyes tracked the room slowly. The open window, the soaked shirt drying by the fire, the flush still not fully faded from Auren's cheeks. Then the wound, he noticed the blood at Auren's mouth. His brow furrowed. Rough night. Auren's voice was hoarse but steady. Couldn't sleep. Kade stepped closer. The door shut behind him with a soft click. Thought I smelled something strange on the wind, he murmured. Like spring breaking through too early. Auren held his gaze. He did not flinch. Just the herbs. Some of them react badly to heat. Kade's eyes dipped, lingering at the collar of Auren's shirt, where his pulse still jumped too fast. He said. Maybe. Then a pause. Longer this time. But usually, herbs don't make wolves bleed from their mouths. Auren smiled. Faint. Cool. Like something practiced until it looked real. You should see the other guy. Kade didn't laugh. He didn't look away either. The tension in the room thickened. Not loud, but tight. Invisible threads pulled taut between bodies that stood too still. Kade stepped closer, one step, just enough for his scent to thread through the air. Auren held his ground. Whatever it was, Kade said softly. It passed. It always does. They stared at each other a second longer. Then Kade turned. I'll have someone restock the hut, he said over his shoulder. Maybe burn the herbs next time. Smoke's safer than scent. He left without waiting for a response. Auren didn't exhale until the latch clicked shut. He slid back down the wall, hand over his mouth, breathing through his teeth. The scent had almost reached his tongue. He couldn't let it happen again. But deep beneath the fear, beneath the ache, something darker stirred. Because when Kade had stepped close enough to catch a thread of scent, he hadn't stepped away. Chapter 9. His fingers smelled like smoke. The door wasn't locked. That should have been the first warning. Kade Darrow's quarters, especially his study, were never left open. Not to patrol wolves. Not to allies. Certainly not to new blood, no matter how well they handled a blade. But Auren Thalosar had spent his life moving where no one looked and opening doors others were trained not to notice. So he stepped inside. The chamber was low-lit, dusk bleeding in from the high western window in bars of tarnished gold. The fire in the hearth burned low and blue, scenting the room faintly of pine resin and scorched parchment. A single wolf-hide rug sprawled before it, the fur rippling faintly in the heat, like something still alive. A desk stood against the far wall, ancient, claw-footed, scattered in ink stains and ash smudges. Papers were everywhere. Loose sketches curled at the corners, pinned down by stone weights. One half-burned logbook rested open, its ink blurred by a water stain in the center. And atop it all, a map. No, not a map. Not exactly. A lineage. Auren stepped closer. His breath caught before he could stop it. Wolves, hand-drawn and named. Marks in red, some crossed out, some circled. Arrows pointing to forgotten clans. And there, near the base of the parchment, a faint sigil inked in gold. The mark of the hollow crown. Beneath it, small, careful, specimen type 27. Omega formed combatant. His kind. No, not kind. Experiment. He reached out, fingertips brushing the edge of the ink. A hand caught his wrist. Not hard, not gentle either. He turned, spine already braced, but Kade was faster. The alpha stood too close, shadowed by the firelight, expression unreadable but quietly burning. His voice was low and rough. "You're the first wolf in a decade to walk in here without knocking." Auren didn't move. His wrist was still caught between them, his fingers hovering just inches from the desk, as if frozen mid-thought. Door was open. It wasn't. Auren tilted his head. The gesture was calm, controlled, but his pulse had gone ragged. Then maybe it wanted to be. Kade's lips twitched. Not a smile. Not anger. Something more dangerous. A thread of something he hadn't decided to pull yet. Slowly, his grip loosened, but instead of letting go, he shifted his hand, gliding his fingers over Auren's, tracing along the fire-warmed skin like he meant to measure it. Then, without warning, he lifted Auren's hand to his mouth and breathed, just once, slow and deliberate. "You touched the firewood." Auren didn't answer. Kade leaned closer, not pulling the hand away, his voice slipping into something quieter, hungrier. "You don't flinch when something burns, do you?" The fire behind them cracked. Auren's lips parted, only slightly. He could feel the heat of Kade's breath ghosting across his fingers now, feel the scentless air curl at the base of his palm like it might coax something out. He held still, too still. Kade's eyes flicked up to his, and in that moment, the space between them became a taut wire, something neither of them moved to cut. The alpha released his hand, but didn't step back. "You walk like a warrior," Kade said low, "but you breathe like someone who's never known what it is to bleed for yourself. You don't know what I've bled for." "No," Kade murmured, "but I know when a man smells like ash and doesn't mind carrying the smoke." Auren's heart thudded. He hated how much it wanted to react, so he dropped his gaze, just for a second. But that second was enough. Kade reached out again, this time not with force, but with something worse, something soft. His fingers brushed along Auren's jaw, ghosting down to his collarbone, not pressing but tasting the air between them. Auren turned away too quickly. "I came for reports. You came for answers." Auren moved to the door, each step deliberate, each breath sharp and cooled by control. But before he could leave, Kade spoke one last time. "You might not fear the fire, Thalosar," he said, "but sooner or later it will learn your name." Chapter 10. The night he didn't mark me. The forest had gone quiet. Too quiet. Even the wind had chosen not to rustle the trees tonight. It had rained briefly after midnight, a quicksilver sweep of cold that soaked the tents and turned the pine needle ground into a bed of trembling scent and memory. Auren sat just outside the ring of firelight, shoulders wrapped in a damp cloak, his silver eyes reflecting the dying embers like twin ghosts. He hadn't spoken since dusk. The patrol had been clean, no threats, no watchers. But the moment they'd made camp, his body had begun to slow in ways he couldn't will away. First, his limbs ached. Then, his temperature rose. By the time the rain came, a fine sheen of sweat had gathered at his temples, and the edges of his vision had begun to pulse in waves. He told himself it was the cold, but his glands said otherwise. The Pharon residue still lingered in his system. The previous night's fever had only receded, not vanished, and now it was back, curling behind his ribs, stirring under his skin. Not enough to break him, just enough to make him vulnerable. His breath hitched softly as he curled deeper into himself. He hadn't meant to fall asleep, but the heat made it impossible to stay still, and the silence folded around him like wool, thick and blinding. He shifted toward the tent flap, his hand brushing the inside canvas. The world spun just slightly. A touch of scent bled from his nape, subtle, barely there, but sharp enough to whisper of things better kept buried. Kade had been watching from the edge of the trees. He hadn't said a word since Auren curled into the bedroll. Hadn't moved. But now he approached, steps slow, careful, the way one might near a wounded beast too proud to admit its bleeding. The tent flap rustled as he slid inside. The space was small, tight with breath and body and damp warmth. The fire outside threw flickers of light against the fabric walls, shadows dancing like memories too close to touch. Auren didn't stir. Not fully. His chest rose and fell in shallow motions. His mouth was parted, lashes damp from fever. The scent in the air was faint, tangled between not quite alpha and something too soft to be that. Kade knelt beside him. He reached out, slowly, paused. Then, just barely, brushed his fingers along Auren's temple, tucking a damp strand of hair back. Auren didn't flinch, but his scent did. It shifted, just enough. Something reactive. Something real. Kade's gaze dropped to the curve of his neck, where the gland lay hidden beneath skin and heat and fevered quiet. He leaned in. The tip of his nose hovered just above the pulse point. The scent closer now was clean, sharpened by control, almost artificial. Almost. He breathed it in, and something inside him stirred. Not hunger. Recognition. A memory of something he hadn't touched in years. Something instinctive. Wolf deep. Auren made a soft sound in his sleep. A sound like resistance. Or maybe need. Kade's lips hovered close. Too close. But he didn't move. Didn't mark. Didn't claim. Instead, he pulled back, inch by inch, like someone holding a live wire and choosing not to light the world on fire. He sat beside him, back against the wall of the tent, exhaling through his nose. Seconds passed. Then a whisper, hoarse and low. "You want something." Kade turned his head. Auren's eyes were half-lidded, fever blurred, half-conscious. But there. He didn't move, but the words came again. "You want something from me." Kade's reply was quiet, almost broken. "I want you to stop lying." Silence. The kind that hurt. Then Auren, softer. "I don't know how." Kade reached out. Not to touch. Just to be near. "Then start with this. If I touched you again, would you stop me?" Auren didn't answer. Not out loud. But his pulse jumped beneath his skin. Kade saw it. And yet he didn't move. Didn't press. He lay back beside him, leaving just enough distance between their bodies to make the tension unbearable. And in the stillness, he whispered, "I won't mark someone who's still pretending not to bleed." Chapter 11. The Side of the Bed That Burns. The room was too quiet, high above the hollow crown, where wind pressed against shattered glass and moonlight cast skeletal shadows on stone. Auren Thalosar sat on the edge of his cot and measured out the powder with surgical precision. Just enough to flatten the edges of his dreams. Just enough to keep the ghosts out. He let the fine white line dissolve under his tongue, the bitterness sinking behind his teeth like memory. His hands didn't shake. They never did until the dreams came. And they would come. They always did. He slid beneath the rough blanket, boots still on, blade tucked at the small of his back. The pillow was cold. Too cold. He left it untouched, folding his arms behind his head, eyes open to the cracks in the ceiling. He did not breathe deeply, did not close his eyes. Not yet. Not until the drug slid beneath his skin and turned his thoughts to water. Eventually it came. Sleep, thin and cruel. The corridor stank of bleach and burnt nerve endings. The lights flickered, always red in the dream, always humming like it was about to scream. Auren was small here, smaller than he should be. The tile floor beneath him was damp with blood. But not his. Not yet. Around the corner, Corvin's voice coiled like a noose. "You breathe because I let you." He turned. The walls were narrowing. His lungs tightened. The door hissed open, and Corvin stood there, silver hair slicked back, eyes dark as the void between stars. He smiled like a lover. "You always come back to me." Auren jolted upright, mouth open, but the scream didn't come. Just breath. Fast. Too fast. and the press of warmth beside him. The blanket had shifted, his shoulder bare. A calloused palm rested there now, grounding soft. Not Corvin's, not the lab, not the past, but his hand was already moving, silent as instinct. Steel met throat. Kade didn't flinch. The blade pressed into the hollow between his collarbones, the edge gleaming in the moonlight slanting through the window. He didn't move, didn't blink. He just looked at him, not like prey, not like an alpha asserting dominance, like a man staring at a wound he'd seen before, a wound that shouldn't still be bleeding. "You're shaking." Auren said nothing. His blade didn't lower. His breath came fast. The scent of fear, not fear of Kade, but fear of himself, hung thin in the air like burned silk. Kade's voice remained calm. "You were dreaming." "I don't dream." "Then who were you trying to kill?" Auren's grip tightened, but something in Kade's gaze softened him, just enough to speak. "Kill fast enough," he murmured, voice low and dead. "You don't have to trust anyone." Kade's jaw worked, a quiet tension at the corner of his mouth. But still, he didn't pull away. Instead, he lifted the blanket higher over Auren's chest with his free hand, the gesture slow, steady. Auren's blade trembled. Just once. He saw it, and he hated that Kade saw it. Kade leaned forward, voice rough. "You don't have to sleep with a knife every night." "You do. I don't point it at people who come closer." "That's your mistake." Silence lapped between them, thick, breathless. Then Kade said, quieter than before, "What did he do to you?" "That broke something." Auren's hand lowered. The blade slid back into its hidden sheath. He turned his face away. "He taught me how to survive." Kade didn't speak. He didn't need to. He just sat beside him, the mattress dipping under his weight, the heat of him pressing against the side of the bed Auren never let anyone touch. But tonight he didn't move away. Not even when the drug began to fade. Not even when the memory of Corvin's voice lingered behind his eyelids like smoke that couldn't be washed off. He let himself lie still. Let Kade stay. Even though the bed burned on that side. Especially because it did. Chapter 12, The Edge of the Bite. The courtyard was silent save for the slow hiss of wind dragging across the snow-damp stone. They called it a training ring, but it had once been a place for public duels, judgment through teeth and blood. The faint outline of old runes still curved beneath the frost, spiraling in faded bone white toward the center like the ribs of something long dead. Auren Thalosar stood barefoot at its heart. The air bit colder than usual, but he didn't feel it. Not where it mattered. Not where skin met war and instinct met purpose. Kade stood opposite him. Loose black shirt open at the neck. Sleeves rolled to the elbow. Scar running like a pale seam from temple to jaw. A wolf who no longer needed to bare his fangs to be feared. Auren tilted his head. Slow, deliberate. "You said we needed to understand each other's rhythms." Kade's eyes tracked him. "I did." Auren stepped closer. "Then teach me." They met like a snapped wire. No signal. No start. Just the crash of movement. Flesh slammed against flesh. Arms locking. Boots scuffing the old ring as their bodies spiraled and spun in violent grace. It wasn't beautiful, but it wasn't meant to be. It was measured violence. Deliberate. Hot with breath and caution and something else. Something older. Kade's grip was solid. But Auren was quicker, blades tucked in muscle and movement, every motion polished by training designed not for defense, but elimination. Still, Kade kept up. More than kept up. He smiled when their forearms caught and ground close. When Auren's boot hooked his ankle. When breath washed across each other's jaw like a promise of something that wouldn't come. Then Kade changed. He shifted, not fully, not beast to bone, but enough. Enough that claws unsheathed. Enough that his pupils narrowed to the thin line of a predator who smelled weakness. It happened in a blink. One clawed hand raked down Auren's shoulder. Intentional, controlled. A precise strike not to maim, but to expose. Fabric split. So did skin. And for the first time in years, air kissed the bare skin of Auren's scent gland. He froze. just for a breath, because that was all it took. His blood surged forward, thick with suppressed pheromones. It hit the air in a pulse, wet, warm, raw. A scent that shouldn't exist in this body, with this name under this mask. Auren's chest rose. Kade stopped moving. For a second, just 1 second, there was no fight left. Only breath, only scent, only heat. Then Kade moved. Not as alpha, not as hunter, but as something starved. He closed the distance in a blink, hand braced behind Auren's head, and pressed his mouth, open, trembling, not to lips, but to skin, to the bleeding seam just above Auren's scent gland. Auren flinched, not from pain, but from the crack of control splintering in his spine. He couldn't move, couldn't speak. The warmth of Kade's breath seared through him like fever. For 3 full seconds, Kade stayed there, nose brushing skin, lips hovering, tasting the truth that had no language. Then Auren opened his eyes, and Kade pulled back, breathing hard, hands clenched. A single muscle in his jaw twitched, and for the first time, the wolf looked afraid. But not of Auren, of what he had just wanted. He whispered, voice hoarse and ruined, "You're not." He didn't finish, because finishing would make it real. Auren stepped back, pressed his hand over the exposed wound, blood smearing against his palm. His scent lingered like smoke at the end of a fire no one meant to start. But Kade didn't move, didn't accuse, didn't ask, just stared, as if the truth had bitten him somewhere deeper than the skin. "You shouldn't have smelled that," Auren said flatly, voice steadier than he felt. Kade's lips parted. "But I did." Their eyes met. Everything else, snow, wind, breath, fell away. And for the first time in Auren's life, it wasn't a kill or a lie or a command that threatened to undo him. It was a question, one Kade hadn't yet asked aloud, and one Auren wasn't sure he could keep surviving if he did. Chapter 13, A Scar Made of Words. The air in the war chamber of the Hollow Crown was thick with static. Not from technology, but from something older, more feral, tension, tightly wound and silent, like the moment before a storm split the trees. Auren stood at the edge of the map table, silver eyes reflecting the flicker of light from a lone projector as it cycled through old territorial scans. His arms remained crossed behind his back, spine straight, chin slightly tilted, stillness perfected into armor. He hadn't moved in 15 minutes, hadn't spoken in 20. The door had shut a long time ago. Kade was gone, the others dismissed. Auren was alone, where he should have been. Then came the sound. Not a voice. Not yet. Just a shiver across the mind. A breath that wasn't breath. An echo intimate as a whisper down the spine. Auren. He didn't flinch. The signal rode directly into his neural receptors, bypassing every layer of encryption the rebels had patched over his mind. Of course it did. This signal had been written into him years ago. Not by machines. Not by choice. Auren slowly turned from the table, stepping back into the shadows of the room. The mental channel flickered again, and then the voice emerged, polished, velvet smooth, low enough to hum in the bones. "You're still using your old lockout codes. Lazy, darling." His hand clenched at his side. Corvin. The name cracked across his inner world like an old whip. Bitter. Familiar. Too close. He didn't reply. Not with words. Not yet. "They said you're walking beside him now. Kade Thorough." The voice curled around the name with distaste, like a stain. "You're letting him breathe your air? You, of all things, should know better." Auren's silence answered sharper than words. "Is that your rebellion now? Trading leash for leash?" A flick of light snapped behind Auren's eyes. Unbidden memory, jagged and sudden. The lab table, metal restraints, a hand, cold but steady, resting on his wrist. Not to bind, just to test pulse. "Your reactions are remarkable," Corvin had once murmured. "They built you to fight, but they didn't teach you what it means to survive." Auren had trusted him. For 17 weeks and 2 days, Corvin had been the only warmth in the metal hell of Fongspire Crater. He had sat beside him during recovery, brought him water laced with calming compound, whispered stories from outside the lab walls, rivers, colors, things Auren had never seen. And then Corvin was gone, reassigned, elevated, ruptured. The last time Auren had seen him, Corvin's eyes had already turned, dark void swallowing iris, voice tuned no longer for comfort but for control. "You left me," Auren said aloud now, letting his voice echo inside the room. His tone was neutral, but the words burned. There was a pause. "I was taken," Corvin said, and for a moment, the lie almost sounded tender. "But I never let go." Auren opened his palm and closed the signal manually. "Terminate link." The silence returned so suddenly it sucked the breath from the air. The projector clicked once, then went dark. For a long time he simply stood there. No alarms, no reaction, just the steady ache behind his ribcage where something had been stitched long ago and never removed. The door opened behind him, soft but not silent. Kade's scent reached him before his voice, cedarwood and storm. A hint of wind, like he'd been outside again. Searching, restless. "I thought you might want something." Kade's voice was quiet, a little rough with concern. Auren didn't turn. There was the soft clink of glass against stone. A cup. Water. Warm. Auren finally glanced sideways. Kade was holding it out in one hand, his gaze level but careful, as though he could sense the tautness behind Auren's calm. Auren looked at the cup, then at Kade's hand. "Why?" he asked quietly. "Do you always bring things that are warm?" Kade blinked. "Because you're always cold." Auren didn't take the cup, but he didn't look away either. "Cold keeps me sharp," he said. "And warmth keeps you alive," Kade answered. Silence stretched between them, thick as breath, soft as frost. Finally, Auren turned fully to face him, hands loose at his sides. He reached out. Kade didn't ask who. He didn't need to. He only said, "Do you want me to track the signal?" No, Auren's voice was colder than usual. "It's an old thread. Let it fray." Kade nodded once, then set the cup on the table and stepped back, giving space without retreating. That was the thing about Kade. He didn't push. He didn't press. He stayed, even when it hurt. When the door closed again, Auren stepped to the table and wrapped one hand around the untouched glass. His fingers flexed, once, then tightened. He drank, not because he was thirsty, but because Kade had brought it. And in the distance, where his mind should have been silent, something stirred again. A flicker, a memory, a command whispered in another lifetime. "You were made to obey, Auren, but I was made to make you." He exhaled slowly, setting the glass down, and the crack across his silence widened, just a little. Chapter 14, Corvin. The echo that stayed. The ruin still reeked of formaldehyde and charred bone. Corvin stepped through the bent iron threshold without hesitation. The old research facility at Crater Verge had long since collapsed into myth, but the ghosts here knew his name. He walked them like corridors, silent and exacting, boots brushing over ash and melted tile. Behind him, the beta operative struggled to keep up, coughing against the stench of burnt hormones and oxidized blood. "Sir, this place isn't secure. We should transmit from—" "Transmit," Corvin murmured. "And the signal scatters like prey sent on a storm." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The beta fell silent instantly. They descended into the central chamber, once an Omega containment wing, now a crypt of broken slabs and restraint chains, blackened from internal combustion. Here Corvin stopped. He inhaled, long and deliberate, nostrils flaring as if scent alone could awaken what had been caged here, what he had once been. "Omega Class 13, he whispered, running his fingers along a shattered medical bracket still fused to the wall. Bondless, violent, responsive only to one handler. He looked down at his own reflection, warped in the broken aluminum of a diagnostic plate. Silver veins flickered beneath his pale skin. His irises, once storm gray, now swam with the abyss, darkness not found in nature, but spliced from it. The beta lingered behind him, shifting uneasily. With respect, sir, I still don't understand. Why reprioritize the target? Thalosar's extraction was the directive. Kade was a variable at best. Corvin turned slowly. For a moment, his expression was blank. Then came the smile. Not warm, not sharp, just off, like a mask that didn't fit the skin beneath. You weren't bred to understand, Corvin said calmly. Then he took a step forward, and the air shifted. A wave of alpha presence surged from his body like a silent detonation. No growl, no roar, just pure, atmospheric crush. Pheromonal saturation so dense it made the lights in the ruins flicker. The beta gasped, dropped to one knee, fingers clawing at his collar as invisible pressure closed around his throat. Corvin crouched in front of him, voice still velvet soft. You want to know why Thuro isn't a variable anymore? He tilted his head. Because variables don't change constants. And Kade has touched what was mine. The beta's mouth moved without sound, struggling. Corvin brushed 2 fingers down his temple and snapped the mental connection. The operative slumped, unconscious, sweat slicking his brow. Corvin rose without urgency, turning back toward the cracked mirror that hung jagged from the far wall. It was scorched and smeared with ash, but he could still see himself. Not the version he'd been, the version they'd made of him. Once a mentor, once a handler, once a man with hands that coaxed Auren out of bloodlust and night terrors, one whispered breath at a time. Now something else. He touched his reflection with the back of one hand and said, too softly for anyone else to hear, he was built to serve, and I was built to own. The bond was mine first. The image of Auren in his mind was sharp, silver eyes too calm for his age. That knife-like stillness in his posture that only came from war bred in sterile light. But Corvin remembered the early days. The way Auren had flinched only from his own name, the way he'd once said please like it was a foreign word, and the way he'd looked at Corvin, before they'd ruined them both. Corvin closed his eyes. Just once. Just long enough to recall the heat of Auren's neck beneath his hand. The shudder not of fear, but of submission learned through care. Before desire had curdled into dependency. Before Auren had started to resist. That resistance he would tear out. Strip down. Break open until a light blinked red on the inside of his wrist comm. Trace located. Subject Thalosar 07. Status. Off-grid. Monitored via hormonal flare log. Contact. Pending. Corvin's smile returned. Gentler this time. Almost tender. He murmured, I'll come to you, Auren. And when I do, I'll remind you what it felt like. Before you thought you could choose someone else. He reached down, plucked the discarded beta's transmitter from his belt, and crushed it in his fist. Glass cracked, metal crumpled. Far away, in the wilds of the north, Auren's name was being spoken by someone who had no right. Corvin would fix that. He turned from the ruin and walked into the night, leaving the scent of ozone, scorched metal, and twisted memory in his wake. Chapter 15. Dream Me didn't say no. The pills had dissolved too fast on his tongue. Auren lay in the dark, one arm flung across his eyes, the other resting loose by his side, fingertips twitching like they were searching for the edge of something they'd already slipped off. The room was quiet, too quiet for the storm thundering inside him. He'd measured the dose precisely. Half a capsule of neural dampener, 2.5 milligrams of adrenal suppressor, and a trace of inhibitor mist sprayed onto his pillow. Enough to dull the worst of it. Enough to keep the memories from clawing their way through the cracks in his skull. But tonight, something hadn't held. The moonlight sliced through the frost-coated glass above his bed, carving lines across the sheets like pale restraints. And his body, traitorous thing, began to heat. First a pulse at his wrist, then the nape of his neck, then lower, deeper. The scent spilled from his skin before he could stop it. Thin at first, like spring thaw, then thicker, heavier, edged in hunger. Curled into the corners of the room like steam. And somewhere in the fever of his mind, the walls of the room unraveled. He was in the corridor again. Not the real one. The other one. White-tiled, endless, filled with the sound of dripping and distant static. A place he hadn't walked in years, but which remembered every footstep he'd ever taken. He moved barefoot, breathless. Something waited at the end. A shadow of a wolf. Massive, solid, fire-eyed, familiar. Kade. But not Kade, not truly. Not with that shape, those eyes, that hunger wearing his scent like armor. Still, Auren approached him. Each step echoed in a silence too perfect to be real. His bare soles slapped against slick floor, and every inch of his skin begged not to be seen. But he went anyway, because the ache inside him knew that silhouette. It had known it before reason, before rules, before pain was taught as law. He stood in front of the beast and raised his chin. The wolf leaned forward. The snout brushed his collarbone. Its breath scorched his clavicle. And Auren tipped his head to the side, offering the bare line of his throat like a prayer. "Bite me," he whispered, and it didn't sound like surrender. It sounded like permission. The dream Kade didn't bite, but it licked. Long, slow, one rasp of tongue up his neck to the curve of his ear. Then down, deeper, nosing into the hollow between shoulder and jaw where heat pulsed too close to his gland. Auren whimpered, a sound so small it shattered something in him. His fingers found fur, clutched it, and pulled the beast closer. Mouth to muscle, teeth to heat. "I want," he began, but he never finished. Outside the dream, Kade stood with one palm flat against the doorframe. The scent had drawn him. He'd come like he always did when Auren's pheromones began to bleed through the stone, silent, unseen, patient. But this time it had been different. This wasn't the suppressed scent of control cracking. This was yearning, wolf deep, unfiltered, and raw. And then he heard it. His name, not spoken, moaned, barely audible, ripped from somewhere between pain and pleasure, swallowed by a pillow. Inside, Auren shifted under the blankets. One leg kicked free. His hand curled against his thigh, fingers tight with tension. He didn't even know he was moving, but Kade knew. He exhaled once through his nose, slow and low. The alpha in him howled for access. The man in him refused to cross the threshold. So he sat. He crouched outside that door, back against the cold stone, and waited. For the scent to fade. For the storm to pass. For Auren to come back to himself without shame or intrusion. He waited all night. The sun rose pale and reluctant, barely slicing through the dense mist that coiled around the mountain tower. Inside the room, Auren woke drenched in sweat, heartbeats stuttering under his skin like a second pulse. He didn't move at first. His eyes opened slowly, lashes dragging over flushed cheekbones. The blankets clung to him, damp and tangled, but he barely felt the cold. He tasted something else. Salt, metal, shame, and the echo of a name on his lips, Kade's, like it had been carved there in sleep. His gaze drifted to the door. There, beside it, sat a clay pitcher of water and a folded cloth. Beside them, a tiny vial of cooling suppressant. And a note. No words. Just a single pressed fingertip on the page. His fingerprint, still warm. Auren swallowed. Got up. He went to the mirror, wiped the fog from its surface, and stared. There, just above the ridge of his collarbone, was a mark. Not a bite, not a bruise, but something softer, reddish, lingering, like lips had been there, or teeth hadn't, and that was somehow worse. His fingers grazed it lightly, and his body answered in a rush of heat. He closed his eyes, breathed out slowly, then looked at the door again. Still shut, still untouched. The burn in his chest didn't come from the dream. It came from the fact that Kade hadn't come in. Not even when he could have. Not even when Auren had whispered yes without knowing it. Chapter 16. His mouth never touched me, but I felt it. The air in the training court had no business being that cold. Dawn hadn't broken yet, but the sky was bruising at the edges, bleeding violet and ash above the stone ramparts. Auren moved through it like breath held too long, silent, taut, burning from the inside out. He hadn't slept. Again. Dreams had carved too close to bone. His mouth still tasted of something he hadn't kissed. His skin still itched where no one had touched. So he ran drills, blades, rolls, flips, one after another in a precise, brutal rhythm. Anything to burn it off. Anything to outrun the heat still trapped beneath his ribs. His body moved flawlessly until it didn't. One leap, off-center. A twist, half-second too slow. His boots slipped on dew-slick stone, and the ground reached up for him like a trap sprung silent. Except he never hit it. Arms caught him from behind. A body broke his fall. And breath, warm, steady, ghosted the curve of his neck. Kade. The Alpha's grip didn't tighten. It just held. Strong and still and wrong in a way Auren couldn't explain. Because it didn't hurt. Because it didn't demand. Because it didn't take. But his gland pulsed, sharp and fast, a traitorous spike in temperature, scent, need, and Kade felt it. He didn't move away, didn't speak, only lowered his head, slow and unhurried, until his mouth hovered less than an inch from the crook of Auren's shoulder, right above the spot that hadn't stopped aching since the dream. His lips never touched, but Auren felt it, a ghost of heat, a pressure that never landed. Like a shadow cast by longing. Auren's breath caught. The gland beneath his skin pulsed again, and this time it wasn't a whisper. It was a call. His elbow slammed backward. He broke the hold and spun, driving both palms into Kade's chest. The Alpha staggered a step, but didn't raise his hands. Auren's voice came out like a blade unsheathed too quickly. Rough, shaking. "Is this your plan?" he snapped. "Wait until I lose control and then pounce?" Kade blinked once, then again. The scar above his brow shifted as he tilted his head, gaze unreadable. "I don't need to wait," he said softly. "Your scent right now is already enough." Auren's entire body went still. The training court may as well have frozen over. He swallowed, jaw tightening as he tried to will away the heat from his face, from his scent, from his glands, which betrayed him more each day. "You arrogant bastard," he hissed. "You think this is about you?" "No," Kade replied. "I think it's about us." That made it worse. The quiet, the simplicity, the truth tucked inside it like a secret waiting to bite. Auren turned away fast, too fast, and his spine shouted its strain. He felt Kade's gaze tracking the tension that snapped down his back like a drawn bow. He moved toward the weapons rack without looking back, grabbed a training blade with too much force, and hissed when the hilt sliced into a blister still healing on his palm. Blood welled instantly. He didn't flinch. Kade didn't approach, only spoke. "You're not broken, Auren," he said. "You're just afraid of being seen." Auren's laugh was short, ugly. "Spare me the soft edges," he said. "I don't need them." "I think you do." That made him whirl again. His chest rose and fell too fast. His skin burned. The scent was unmistakable now. Unfiltered Omega panic tangled with rage and shame and longing. He hated it. Hated the fact that Kade hadn't made a move, hadn't grabbed him, hadn't bitten, hadn't touched him when he so clearly could have. The lack of violation felt worse than the possibility of one, because it meant Kade saw him, and still waited, and still wanted him clean. Auren threw the blade across the court. It clanged off stone and shattered the silence like a war horn. He turned on his heel and left. Didn't say another word. Didn't trust what his voice would do. He barely noticed the pain until the med leaf was already being pressed to his palm. Auren sat in the temporary clinic with his injured hand laid out on a slab of cool slate. He didn't look up when the door opened. But he didn't need to. The scent hit first. Kade again. This time bearing a cup of something that smelled herbal and warm. "For the edge," he said, setting it down beside him. Auren stared at the mug like it was a bomb, then muttered, "You always bring things with temperature." Kade said nothing. He waited. Auren didn't touch the cup, but he didn't push it away either. He simply stood, turned his back and walked out, his silence ringing louder than any scream. In the herb vault an hour later, alone, Auren found himself staring at the small brass mirror nailed crookedly to the back wall. It showed too much. His pupils were blown wide, his skin flushed at the throat. A heat stain still lingered on the hollow above his gland. Kade hadn't kissed him, hadn't touched him, but the space between their bodies had burned hotter than flame. Auren raised 2 fingers to that spot, barely brushing the skin, and his body shivered in response. Just once. A silent admission he'd never speak aloud. Not yet. Not while his mind still clawed at control. Not while memory still wore the face of a man who whispered in his blood. Chapter 17, The Voice That Still Lives in My Blood. The night had teeth. It bit deep into the trees at the edge of the hollow crown, frost sharpening the edges of every branch. The moon sagged low, pallid as a dying eye watching, and somewhere beneath it all Auren ran. He didn't know when he'd left his room, only that the sheets had gone cold, too cold, and something in his blood had burned hot enough to drown him. Now the trees whispered again, not with leaves, with him. "You never buried me, little wolf." The voice wasn't loud. Corvin never was. He didn't need to be. His voice lived beneath the skin, behind the ear, nestled in the part of Auren's skull where the silence used to live. Auren stumbled, one hand braced to a moss-slick trunk, breath ragged. His body thrummed like the nerve of a half-healed wound. His mouth was open, panting, tasting air that wasn't just air. His information gland throbbed, and something in the woods answered, not with words, with instinct. "You still carry me," Corvin said, tone low and coiled. "You still sleep in the rhythm I taught you. You still fight like you want me to watch." Auren clenched his jaw so hard his molars screamed. "I carry nothing," he rasped aloud to the shadows. "I gutted you out." But his scent betrayed him. A curl of Omega musk leaked out in the cold, thin and sharp, enough to catch the breeze, enough to catch attention. He felt it before he saw it. Wolves. 2, 3, maybe more. Shadows between trees. Shapes with eyes that glowed just faintly silver in the dark. Prowling. Stirred by something their instincts didn't understand but hungered for. "You were made for me," Corvin whispered. "Don't forget who poured the first howl into your lungs." Auren dropped to his knees. He didn't fall. He dropped. Deliberate. Trying to stay grounded. But the pull was there, low and primal. His gland was overheating. His pulse was a drumbeat without a master. His hand trembled. The wolves growled, low and questioning. And still Corvin's voice tickled the inside of his skull. "Let them smell it. Let them see what I made." "No," Auren growled. He bit down on his wrist. Hard. Teeth to flesh. He didn't draw blood for pain. He drew it for proof. Pain to anchor. Pain to claim. Pain to cut the cord. Warm liquid flooded his mouth. His own blood. Metallic and fierce and his. The voice inside his head cracked. Static. Not silence. A faltering in the link. "You can't." "I can?" Auren hissed, voice wet with rage. "I am not yours." His information flow stuttered, the gland shuddering under his command. The scent stopped bleeding. The wolves paused, stilled, and slinked away unsettled. The clearing grew quiet again. Snow fell. Slow. Soft. It should have felt peaceful. But Auren only felt the aftermath. He stared at his wrist, blood welling in teeth marks so clean they looked clinical. His voice, quiet, barely more than a thought, slipped free. "I am not your experiment." He didn't cry, but he curled forward, one arm around his middle like something might tear its way out from within. Far in the distance, boots broke snow. Fast. Sharp. Kade. He was coming. Of course he was. The bond had stirred. Auren's fingers clenched tighter around his wound. He couldn't let Kade see him like this. Not yet. From across the trees, Kade ran. No hesitation. No breath. His mind felt like it had cracked for a second back in the hall, pressure blooming in his skull like something foreign had touched him through the bond. And Auren's scent, sweet, sharp, wrong, had flared like a flare lit in the dark. Now he was close, too close, close enough to... He stopped, because the wind shifted, and even without sight he knew. Auren was there, blood in the air, control thinned to nothing, but alive. So Kade didn't call out, didn't rush in. He stood at the tree line, watching, breathing slow, and from his lips, quiet as confession, he whispered, "I'm still here." Auren didn't respond, but the moment stretched, and in it Kade knew, the war had shifted, not outside, inside him, inside Auren, and somewhere in the echo of memory, another voice, not his own, began to fade. Only a little, but enough. Chapter 18. Corvin steps into the cold. The wind at the edge of the dead zone didn't howl. It whispered. Beneath the remains of a half-shattered outpost tower, limbs of black steel twisted against the pale sky like a supplicant's fingers, Corvin stood alone, the snow unmelting beneath his boots. His silhouette, long and narrow-hipped in the dim gray, seemed to belong to the ruins themselves. Ageless, unyielding, left behind only because destruction had forgotten him. But nothing forgot Corvin. Around him, blood steamed. A soldier gurgled near the terminal, one hand still twitching on a frostbitten control panel. The others lay scattered like discarded chess pieces, their armor half torn by claws they'd never seen coming. The former commander's spine had been removed with clinical precision. "Too slow," Corvin murmured, licking the pad of his thumb where a single drop of arterial blood gleamed. "Too eager to follow protocol. Too weak to lead." He stepped over a twitching boot and approached the relay station embedded in the frozen ground. The screen blinked red. Alpha target. Kade Thorough. Status. Escaped. Coordinates. Inconclusive. Not anymore. A flick of Corvin's wrist brought his portable neural amplifier to life. A low hum that settled into the bones like a fever waiting to rise. The device coiled around his wrist like silver wire, and the nodes pressed against the veins of his neck like an old lover's breath. He closed his eyes. The world peeled apart. The mental field lit up like a map of fireflies scattered across wet ash. Distant minds pulsing with faint instinct, weaker wolves blinking out like candles in a storm. He tunneled through them, one by one, ignoring their static-laced fear. Then he found it. Two heartbeats locked together in a frequency that didn't exist before. Not a bond, not yet, but something rawer, hungrier, something older than marking. Corvin's breath hitched, a long inhalation through teeth just shy of a snarl. "Not marked," he whispered, letting the words curl like silk around a dagger. "But tethered." His mental tendrils coiled tighter, pressing through the waves of invisible tension until he could taste them on the edge of his own tongue. One burning, one shaking, one trying not to fall, the other too cold to care. He bled through the channel, the amplifier guiding his intent with surgical cruelty. He didn't need to touch Kade's mind directly. All he had to do was pinch the nerve between them. He found the psychic strand, that embryonic link that wasn't yet a bond, and twisted. In a clearing half a continent away, Kade Theroux's knees hit the soil. It wasn't a sound so much as a fracture. One moment he was scanning the tree line with his rifle at the ready. The next, his head exploded in pain, a knife behind his eyes, buried hilt deep and turning. He let out a guttural snarl, teeth snapping shut on air as his spine arched. His shoulder rammed into a pine trunk, and he bit down on his own flesh, instinct driving him to bleed out the pain. But the agony didn't fade. It multiplied, because he wasn't the only one feeling it. Auren Thalosar gasped in the old temple's quiet, the warmth of the sacred stone suddenly too far away. His palm, clean moments ago, now dripped with blood, fine lines etched across it as though something inside had burst outward. His breath came in short, cracked sobs, and when he tried to stand, his knees folded. "Kade!" He whispered it like a prayer, but it came out like a scream choked on air. He didn't know what was happening. He only knew that someone was inside their bond, someone vile and slick and cold, a presence that dragged razors through the quiet between their hearts. He clutched his chest, dizzy, not marked, not yet marked, but still this pain? Was this what dying felt like? Together? Back in the snow-rimmed ruin, Corvin let go of the strand. He didn't sever it. He just brushed his thumb over it like an owner stroking a collar before the leash was clipped on. "I see you," he said, his voice low and lovely and meant to haunt. "Even in the dark, I see you." The amplifier pulsed once more, registering a surge. Not from the tether. From Auren. Corvin's lips parted. Slow. Fascinated. "You hurt for him." Then the faintest ripple of joy. Twisted, of course. Not love. Something else. Possession unspoken. "You bleed for him." His eyes darkened like twin voids as he turned from the massacre. The soldiers were already forgotten. He walked slowly to the edge of the cliff, looking out over the treacherous valley between him and Kade's claimed territory. He could already hear the storm howling in the distance. But it wasn't the weather that made his pulse quicken. It was the way their pain tasted. "I built you better than this," he said aloud, as if Auren could hear him. "You were mine before you ever knew what freedom meant." A flick of his wrist. The amplifier deactivated. But the damage was done. Corvin turned toward the wind, his long coat catching the current like wings. "Don't worry," he said to the air, soft as a lullaby. "I'll remind you." He stepped down into the valley. And behind him, the broken outpost began to freeze again. Only now, the blood wouldn't melt. Chapter 19, Don't Let Me Smell Like That Again. The forest lay heavy with silence, as if holding its breath. Auren moved like a shadow through the thickets, eyes narrowed beneath the low-hanging mist. His blade, dull from overuse, hung limp at his hip, untouched. He wasn't hunting. Not really. Just searching for signs of movement, scent trails, the brush of something wrong against the pulse of this forest. And for a moment, all seemed quiet, until the ground gave out beneath him. The world twisted sideways with a wet, snapping splash as he plunged down through a moss-soft ledge, tumbling straight into a hollow pool beneath the roots of an ancient tree. The water struck cold first, then heat, prickling, invasive, wrong. He thrashed up for breath, gasping. Something clung to his skin. Sticky, sweet. His breath hitched. His pulse howled. "No!" he croaked, lurching out of the pool. The water dragged at his limbs, thick with gold-green pollen. Not water, he realized in horror. Not natural. Vines trembled beside him, leaves veined with bioluminescence. An engineered creeper. One he'd seen before. Fever thorn. His hands shook. Already, his clothes were soaked with it. Already, the scent began to rise off his body like steam. That cloying, sickeningly sweet, omega heat scent. It bled into the air like a flare shot into a pack of starving wolves. Auren fell to his knees, panting. Then the howling began. Snarls echoed from all sides of the forest. Low, guttural, half-mad, rogues, dozens. His body betrayed him first, his legs trembling, stomach tight with heat, vision blurring as the fever thorn ignited everything his blood had worked so hard to suppress. His scent spilled out in waves, uncontrollable, undeniable. They were coming. He scrambled upright and ran. Branches tore at his arms. His boots slipped over moss and blood-slick roots. He didn't look back, he didn't have to. The thundering of paws behind him was enough. One glimpse and he would fold. He knew what this kind of scent did. To them. To him. The trees thinned. He veered right. And then something exploded from the left, barreling into him and knocking him to the earth. But it wasn't a rogue. Auren. Kade's voice. A growl and a command in one. Auren blinked up into scarred, furious eyes. Kade didn't speak again. He just lifted Auren over his shoulder with terrifying strength. snarled back at the pack of rogues crashing through the trees, and took off running. They didn't speak as Kade sprinted, his entire body taut as steel, barely holding himself together. Auren could feel it, the tremor in the alpha spine, the way Kade's hands gripped him like he was trying not to crush him and failing all the same. Auren's scent poured from his body like smoke. "Kade!" Auren whispered hoarsely. "Don't breathe. It's—" "I know what it is," Kade growled. The wolves behind them were falling away now, slowed by the terrain or repelled by something more powerful, him. Kade's presence alone carried the weight of a dominant, unclaimed alpha. And tonight that dominance burned like fire. When they reached the mountain shelter, Kade didn't bother with the door. He kicked it in. Inside, the world shifted into silence again, but it was the kind before lightning struck. He set Auren down gently, too gently, and turned away like touching him had scorched his palms. Auren collapsed to his knees. The floor was cold stone. He needed that cold. He wanted to shove his face against it, press every fevered inch of his body into it until this scent was gone. Until this part of him, this Omega, was no longer betraying him in every breath. His throat choked, and then the sob came. "Don't let me smell like this again," came out raw, an animal whimper. He dug his fingers into the soaked fabric clinging to his chest and tore it open. Pollen dusted his skin, gold bright and shimmering. Kade stood still. I don't want to be," Auren gasped, shaking. "Not this. Not anymore." His whole body trembled. He dropped to his hands, forehead pressing to the floor, trying to hide from himself, as if that would be enough. As if shame alone could erase what he was. Kade crossed the room, kneeled beside him, didn't touch, didn't speak. Only his scent reached out, steady, pine-sweet and shadow-warm. Grounding. "I didn't mean to," Auren whispered. I fought it for years, and now, one pool of goddamn flowers and I'm—" His voice cracked. "I'm this. You're not this," Kade said quietly. "Then why do I smell like prey?" The silence that followed was sharp enough to bleed. Then a hand. Barely a touch. Kade's palm, brushing across his back, between his shoulder blades, grounding him. Not possessive. Not greedy. Not alpha. Just Kade. Auren's sob broke free. Kade let him fall against him. Didn't flinch. Didn't move. Just held him. One arm braced around Auren's waist, anchoring him through the storm of his own biology. And still, Auren's body ached. His blood still screamed. His thighs burned with phantom need, the fever not yet gone, and Kade must have smelled it, must have felt every ragged breath against his throat. But he didn't move. Auren could feel him shaking with restraint. "Kade," he rasped. Don't you want to?" "No," Kade's voice was low. Final. "I can't stop it. My body's still. Please, just make it stop." Kade exhaled, voice rough with desperation. "I'd rather die than mark you in heat." Auren stilled. That silence bloomed again. Only the crackling fire in the hearth remained. Then Kade rose carefully, lifting Auren with him, cradling him like something already broken, or something worth not breaking. He carried him to the wash basin, wet a cloth, cooled it against his neck. "I'll get it off," he said hoarsely. "Every last trace. You won't smell like that again." Auren trembled in his arms. Kade didn't kiss him, didn't bite, didn't brand. He just held him, until the trembling faded, until the scent began to die down, until Auren, for the first time in his life, believed it was possible to be touched, but not taken. And he wept. Chapter 20. If you bite me, you win. The fever hadn't broken. Though Auren's skin had cooled beneath damp cloths and firelight, though his pulse had steadied to something mortal again, something in him still burned, still howled, still bled smoke. He stood in the center of Kade's mountain cabin, bare-chested, soaked to the bone, his body a battlefield between scent and control. And Kade knelt before him, a bowl of cold water between his hands, cloth steeped and dripping, as if that alone might douse what they both knew could not be washed away. Auren's voice sliced the air. "Don't pretend you're above it." Kade froze. "You smell it," Auren said. His eyes gleamed like a blade unsheathed, silver cutting through the shadows that danced across the log walls. "You feel it. You've felt it since the forest." He stepped forward. 1 foot, then another. His bare skin lit by firelight. Fever warmed and sent drunk and dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with teeth. "You think restraint makes you strong?" he hissed. "You think standing there, breathing like you're not losing your mind, is noble?" Kade looked up, jaw tight, scent coiled like storm clouds behind his skin. "I think not hurting you makes me who I am." Auren struck. He didn't mean to, he didn't plan to, but the next second his hands were shoving Kade back, hard, into the stone wall beside the hearth. The basin clattered to the floor, water spreading across the wood like spilled breath. Auren pressed his forearm against Kade's throat, held him there. Kade didn't resist. "You want to mark me?" Auren spat, voice cracking. "Come on. Here I am. Do it." He bared his throat, not the soft curve of submission, but the defiant offer of a man who dared the monster inside to rise, dared the alpha to claim, dared the wolf to bite. Kade's pupils blew wide. The scent of ozone filled the room. Then he moved. It wasn't gentle. Kade didn't shove. He surged, snarling, hands snapping to Auren's hips and driving him backwards with a force that cracked the air. They tumbled to the ground, firelight flashing across tangled limbs and stripped breath. Kade pinning him with a growl that didn't sound human. His teeth were lengthening. His body had shifted. Wolf. Kade's eyes glowed gold and wrong and beautiful. His claws digging into the floorboards beside Auren's ribs as he crouched above him, trembling. Mouth just above the junction of neck and shoulder. So close. Auren didn't scream. He didn't tremble. He didn't beg. He waited. And that was what shattered Kade. Because he wanted to. The taste of Auren's scent was in his lungs, on his tongue, beneath his skin. His wolf, his blood, wanted to sink teeth into that skin and keep him forever. Not mark. Not own. Bind. He growled low, teeth bared, and then wrenched away with a roar. Not toward Auren. Downward. He sank his fangs into the floor beside Auren's head, splinters flying, blood rising from his own torn gums as he forced himself to not do what every part of his body screamed for. His chest heaved. His hands bled. His entire body shook with the violence of restraint. And then, "I don't want to win you," he rasped. Auren blinked up at him. Kade collapsed onto his side, panting, pale, shaking. His mouth was slick with blood, and still he wouldn't look at Auren's throat. "I don't want to win you," Kade said again, voice threadbare and breaking. "I just want you to stay." Auren lay beneath him, still breathing too hard, scent still rising like smoke in heat-heavy spirals. But something in him, something deeper than heat, older than instinct, shifted. Because no one had ever said that before. Not stay because you're mine, not stay because I broke you, not stay because I bit you first. Just stay. Auren reached up. His hand brushed Kade's jaw. Like, barely a whisper. "You're an idiot," he said, voice hoarse. "I know." A silence opened between them, wide enough to drown in. And then, without a word more, Auren rolled away from him. Rose. His limbs ached. His scent still trailed behind him, but dimmer now, not because the fever had broken, but because something else had. Control hadn't come from the cold cloths or the pain. It had come from Kade, snapping his fangs into the floor rather than Auren's skin. Auren stared into the hearthlight. His throat burned. He wasn't used to not being claimed. He wasn't used to someone refusing him, and he hated how much that hurt. Behind him, Kade groaned, sat up. His voice came low. "If I'd bitten you," he said, "you'd never forgive me." "You're wrong," Auren whispered. Kade tensed. "I'd never forgive myself." He turned then, met Kade's eyes, both of them bloodied, bruised. still aching from things they hadn't said. Kade stared at him like he was watching the world rebuild itself, crooked, brutal, but still beautiful. They didn't touch. They didn't kiss. But something irreversible had shifted. In the blood. In the breath. In the bite that hadn't landed. Chapter 21. A Mark Without Teeth. The wolf-shaped pool glimmered with old moonlight, though there was no moon overhead. Lit by silver fire and etched into the stone courtyard like a scar that would not fade. The ceremonial bath had not seen a body in years. Not since the last Alpha King was crowned. Not since the last war. Now it cradled Auren Thalosar. He sat still in its center, water rippling around his waist. His hair was damp, skin paler than ice. A faint, fever-born flush touched his cheeks, but it was shame more than heat that bloomed beneath his skin. Across the edge of the pool stood Kade, kneeling, silent, waiting. Auren hadn't spoken since he'd woken from the fever-drenched collapse. He'd refused food, water, touch. Only when Kade had wordlessly carried him here, through the halls of the crumbling wolf palace, through dust and memory and stone, had he blinked, had he breathed. But now he barely did that. Kade's voice, when it came, was low. Sand-worn, careful. Do you know why this place still echoes? Auren didn't answer. His eyes were on the carvings along the basin's edge, old runes, faded with time. Wolf claws, crescent moons, blood. Because they only ever used it for one thing, Kade murmured. Marking. The moment when one wolf took another, not just in flesh, but in vow. Auren's fingers flexed beneath the surface. His scent rose and broke against the water like a tide he couldn't stop. Kade's boots padded closer. The air grew warmer. I brought you here, Kade said, voice raw now. Not to mark you, but to remind you that you were born with more than claws and pain. You're not just what they made. I'm not anything, Auren said, voice cracked like old stone. Not anymore. Kade knelt at the water's edge. Then let me be something for you. Auren's head snapped up. Silver eyes met dark gold. Kade reached forward. No sudden movement. No demand. Just slow fingers, unbuckling the bracers on his arms, letting them fall to the stones with a dull clink. Then he stepped into the water. Fully clothed, the pool accepted him without ripple. Auren's throat bobbed. What are you doing? Kade came closer, water climbing his chest. I won't mark you. Auren flinched. Kade halted, just within reach. But I'll leave something else. If you let me. I don't want your pity. This isn't pity. Kade's voice dropped. This is the only way I know how to fight for someone without forcing them. Auren closed his eyes. Then what is it? Kade stepped close. Slowly, carefully, he reached one hand to Auren's cheek, warm against the chill. His thumb brushed beneath his eye. And then, Kade leaned forward and kissed him. Not the kind of kiss made for dominance. Not the kind made for claim. It was softer than Auren expected. Slower. It pressed into him like a memory being carved, warm and deep and unbearably steady. And Kade didn't touch his neck, didn't press teeth to gland, didn't even brush the heat-throbbing point of scent. He avoided it entirely. Auren didn't pull away, didn't tremble. His lips parted, not in instinct, not in surrender, but in something slower, something that felt like recognition. And Kade sighed into the kiss like a man who had been holding his breath for years. When they parted, the water was lapping gently around them. I won't take what's not mine, Kade whispered, forehead resting against Auren's. You just kissed me, Auren murmured. Kade smiled. A scar pulled at his lip. Then let it be a mark without teeth. They stayed there, forehead to forehead, heartbeat to heartbeat, in the wolf-carved pool that had seen centuries of blood but had never seen something like this. Half a world away, something shattered. Corvin stood in the remains of his darkened observation chamber. Blood streaked down his palm where he'd crushed the mental link device into shards. His breathing was too calm, too measured. The link had given him everything, scent, voice, heat, and he had felt it. Felt Auren's lips open not from pain, but from trust. felt the rise of that soft bond that was not instinct, not marking. Something worse. Emotion. And it had been Kade. Kade. Not him. He turned to the glass wall where the stars barely blinked through black frost. "They think that was the worst I could feel," he whispered. He touched his throat, the phantom memory of Auren's past submission still flickering beneath his skin. "They're wrong." The sound that came from him next was not a growl. It was a vow, and it echoed through metal and void like the edge of a knife that had never been sheathed. Chapter 22 The Weapon That Wasn't Me. The corridor groaned as if it remembered how many things had died here. Metal ribs arched overhead like the fossilized spine of a god, twisted by time and frostbite. The walls were scorched in places, peeled in others, revealing layers of wire, memory, and blood. Beneath Corvin's boots, the floor tiles still bore the faint wolf sigil of Fongspire crater, though time and flame had almost erased it. The labs were long abandoned, but the ghosts never left. He moved through the wreckage like he was walking through a ruined cathedral. His touch lingered on the console terminals, fingertips sweeping the dust from data panels that hadn't blinked in years. Around him, broken stasis pods loomed like coffins cracked open from the inside. Names and numbers etched in faded ink across frosted glass. Most unreadable, but not all. Unit 03 Delta, Unit 06 Theta, Unit 07 Omega, and then Unit 01A. Auren Thalosar, the only one who lived. Corvin's hand lingered over the ruined pod, eyes hooded, voice like silk dragged across a blade. He wasn't supposed to survive. A rustle behind him. The Alpha assigned to the Vanguard strike unit approached with careful steps. The scent of mild irritation curled beneath his command tone. "You summoned us to a dead zone, sir. The terrain here is unstable. We should relocate, Command." Corvin turned his head slowly. His eyes glinted, obsidian slicked with something bottomless. Something that didn't blink when pain screamed or begged. "Are you telling me where to stand?" he asked, voice a caress and a curse. The Alpha stiffened. Corvin smiled. Then crack, the air twisted. A low thrum passed through the walls like static had found breath. It wasn't loud. Wasn't physical. It was pressure. Alpha wave distortion. Unfiltered. Unbound. The Vanguard officer gasped, dropped to one knee, then both, clutching his ribs as if his lungs had gone cold. Blood trickled from his nose. A vein at his temple pulsed too fast, too hard. "Stand down," Corvin whispered, voice spilling like oil. "Or lie down forever." The wolf crumpled. Corvin stepped over him with disdain so refined it bordered on holy. He reached the central console of the Echo control chamber, where a dead terminal blinked once, then came to life beneath his palm. Dozens of eyes blinked open across the walls. Monitors, feeds, memories. The hollow crown's silhouette appeared in the far view, that crumbling fortress now flickering with fresh torches. Rebels. Hope. Ruin reawakened. He zoomed in, caught the faint signature of Auren, wrapped in fresh linens, a bandage at his hip, and a silver glint in his eyes that should have belonged to something already dead. Beside him stood Kade. Always Kade. Corvin's jaw ticked. He switched feeds again. Found what he needed. The sealed cryo-channel logs. He entered a code. Private 1. Zoar Echo 1. From the depths of the system, something old stirred. Something only he had authorization to release. The floor beneath the Echo control center groaned. Distantly, metallic locks disengaged one by one. Behind the wall, a hidden chamber hissed open. They emerged like relics from the sea. 6 of them, built from the same genome mold as Auren's, but warped by dosage errors, incomplete bindings, and psychological fractures. Their bodies were bulkier, their scent signatures erratic, their pupils ringed with green static. They stood naked but for grafted tracking collars, blinking into the light like they'd been dreaming of war. "Subjects Theta Line," Corvin whispered. "Failed models, they called you." He walked among them like a priest among ruined angels. "But I know better." One of them bared its teeth. Another crouched, sniffing the air like it recognized something far away, far familiar. Auren is compromised, Corvin said quietly. He has forgotten what he was designed for. He turned, eyes lit with that dangerous serenity. Kade is the infection. He paused. Effective immediately, this is a dual-target eradication protocol. No capture, no marking, no mercy. The six nodded, like weapons finally told to fire. The night outside was velvet black and windless. Corvin stood alone on the craggy highlands just east of the Hollow Crown's outer range, where the frost dusted his shoulders like bone ash. Behind him, the failed models waited, huddled in cloaks, still silent, still listening. Ahead of him, the old fortress glittered with flickers of torchlight. In one high window he saw a silhouette pass, a lean one, arms folded tight. Another figure came close behind, tall and broad. They stopped inches apart. You let him kiss you, Corvin thought. He flexed his hands, clenched his jaw. Something cracked in his knuckles. You let him pretend you were his, he breathed. Not prey, not prototype, not even equal. No, Auren let Kade hold him like he was something worth holding. Corvin smiled. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes, that never had. You always thought I was the weapon, he whispered to the wind. But I was never meant to be the weapon. He exhaled slow. I was meant to unleash it. And from the dark of the highlands, he lifted one hand and snapped his fingers once. The wind changed, and the hunt began. Chapter 23, Teeth for Blood, Not for Love. The fog came in first, soft as silk, cold as teeth. It slithered through the trees like something alive, veiling every branch, every stone, every breath. The moon was a smeared eye above them, lidless but blurred, as though even it dared not watch what was coming. Auren felt it before he heard it. The pressure in the air, the shift in scent. Not a predator, no, not just that. A memory weaponized. Don't move, Kade murmured beside him, low and tight, hand halfway to the hilt at his belt. Auren's fingers stopped on the stalk of the herb he'd been plucking. He didn't blink. Too late. The snap of tension in the ether was like a whip cracked straight through the forest's lungs. And Kade fell. 1 second standing. The next, collapsed to his knees with a strangled grunt. Hands to his skull, pupils blown wide like someone had lit a fire inside his mind. Kade! Auren dropped beside him, but didn't need to ask. He already knew. The cold that seeped under his skin wasn't wind. It was him. Didn't I tell you? Said a voice from the fog, smooth as silk soaked in venom. How poorly he would handle my presence. The trees parted like they feared him. Corvin stepped through, graceful, pale, wrapped in the tattered long coat of an alpha who wore his ruin like a crown. The collar was torn, the buttons undone. Beneath, his skin gleamed with a sheen of heatless power, and the mark on his throat glowed faintly with broken sigils. His eyes fixed on Auren like a wolf eyeing the first crack in a door. You've grown, he said softly. Or maybe just remembered how to pretend. Auren rose slowly. Kade groaned behind him, fingers twitching like he was trying to crawl back to his feet. Corvin didn't glance at him. All his attention was locked on Auren. You're still beautiful when you're lying, he added, smile brittle at the edges. But I taught you that, didn't I? Auren's jaw locked. Leave. Is that what you said to him too? Corvin tilted his head. When he touched you like he had the right, did you moan for him the way you used to for me? Or have you forgotten who showed you how? Auren didn't speak. His fingers twitched. Corvin stepped closer. You don't remember? He pressed, voice turning colder. Who taught you how to breathe through pain? How to arch your back to make them want you? How to kill with your mouth just as easily as with your hands? Auren's silence cracked. He drew his blade, but he didn't point it at Corvin. He dragged the edge along his own palm. Blood welled up, hot, thick, startlingly red. Corvin froze, and Auren dropped to one knee, drew the blade across the top of his chest, right through the silvered ink of the wolf mark there. The ancient tattoo burned under the cut. Smeared, broken. His voice cracked with something rawer than rage. I am not your experiment. His breath steamed in the cold, red dripping down his bare chest, down the ruined ink, down the flesh that once bore another's ownership. I am not a weapon you get to name. Corvin flinched. For the first time, the fog stilled. But Kade moved. Not much. Just a breath, a sound, a shift. Then he was there. Half risen, barely conscious, blood at his brow, he still moved. In front of Auren, shielding him, his arms opened wide like he could take the full force of a psychic storm with nothing but skin and instinct. His voice was barely a whisper. Don't! Corvin's mouth curled. He looked at Kade like a man looks at a stray animal in a bed that isn't his. I should have broken your spine the first night I saw you. Kade didn't blink. I should have bitten him the second he looked away from me. Should have marked him so deep his scent never forgot me. Kade just stood, bleeding, trembling, but unbowed. And yet, Corvin said softly now, almost wonderingly, he still gets up for you. The words dropped like stones in a frozen lake. Auren, still on his knees, reached forward. His hand slid against Kade's side. Warm, reassuring. Not to pull him back. Not to beg him to stop. But to say, I see you. Corvin's smile twisted into something jagged. I hope you choke on his name when he dies, he hissed. Then the forest ripped open behind him, his hounds descending like shadows given shape. But even before they landed, Kade and Auren moved, together. Two wolves not born but forged, not claimed but chosen, not mated but aligned. And the fog finally screamed. Chapter 24, the first time I chose him. The storm had passed, but its silence was worse than its scream. Snow clung to the edges of the abandoned hunting shelter. Its walls bowed inward like a creature bracing against pain. Inside, the hearth burned low, flickering in hesitant gasps as if unsure whether to live or fade. Shadows crawled up the stone walls, trembling like thoughts that refused to settle. Kade lay on the narrow cot, broad chest rising with effort, bandages soaked with blood that had already dried to rust. His skin shimmered with fever sweat, hair damp and tangled against the worn pillow, jaw clenched as if he were still fighting something only he could see. And he kept whispering my name, barely audible, like breath lost between heartbeats, over and over again, like it was the only thread tying him to whatever edge he was dangling over. Auren, I had seen death before, touched it, delivered it. I had watched comrades scream their last and enemies gasp for forgiveness I never gave. But nothing had prepared me for this, to watch him unravel. Not from blades, not from war, but from the slow, relentless burn of his own body turning against him. His scent was wild with imbalance, all scorched pine and iron wind, feral and out of rhythm. His pheromones lashed out like wounded things, desperate for anchor, for resonance. For me, I stood by the door too long, fists clenched at my sides. I had already crushed the dose in my pocket. The suppressant vial I hadn't dared go a day without. Its glass lay shattered in the snow behind the shelter, where I'd thrown it like it might bite me if I held it a second longer. This time I wouldn't silence myself. I moved closer, step by step, breath by breath, until I was kneeling beside him. The heat pouring off his body felt like standing near open flame, hungry, chaotic, and painfully alive. My fingers hovered over his cheek before I let them fall, lightly, like a tremble of wind across stone. Kade, I whispered, but he didn't stir. His skin burned under my palm. I swallowed, heart thudding hard enough to rattle my ribs. And then, I let go, of fear, of defense, of the cage I'd built around every soft part left in me. I opened my pheromone pathways like unfolding a part of myself I'd forgotten how to use. Felt like tearing silk from scar tissue, sharp, vulnerable, raw. The scent that rose from me was nothing like the sterilized veil my suppressants used to weave. It was sharp winter air chased with storm water, the cold clarity after a fight that doesn't kill you, a shiver of wildness and something else, something tender. His breathing hitched, then his head turned, barely, toward me. His chest heaved, mouth parting on a sigh that sounded like relief. like surrender. Auren, he rasped again. This time he was reaching. His hand found my wrist, trembling, rough with calluses, and heat. He didn't grip, he held, like I was the only real thing in a world unraveling beneath him. I lowered myself beside him on the cot, careful not to disturb his wounds. But I pressed my body close enough for his instincts to find mine. His scent tangled with mine in the air, chaotic threads trying to braid into something whole. When his arm pulled me closer, I didn't resist. I slid into his hold like water finds a broken place, like gravity had been waiting for this all along. His mouth brushed my temple, unfocused and half-conscious, but I could feel the tremor behind it. His whole frame shuddered as my scent sank deeper into him, quieting the storm in his blood. And I whispered, barely audible in the dark, "If you wake up, I won't run anymore." He didn't answer, but his breathing slowed, and for the first time in a long, long time, I let myself believe he might hear me. Not just my voice, but what I meant. I won't run. Not from this. Not from you. The fire dimmed. The scent of snow pressed against the windows, and in the fragile quiet, his hold around me tightened. Not in dominance, not in demand, but in recognition. And that was the moment I chose him. Not as a command, not as fate, but as the only answer that made sense when the whole world tried to make me forget what love could feel like. Chapter 25, The Scar That Tastes Like Freedom. The scent of antiseptic was thick in the air, but it couldn't drown out the metallic tinge of blood, or the deeper, quieter ache that laced the room like an unfinished prayer. Kade was awake, bare-chested. His skin was mottled with half-healed wounds, muscle taut with pain and instinct still riding too close to the surface. He stood near the far table of the Wolf Palace's infirmary, head bowed, dark hair damp and unruly, as if he'd ripped the bandages off himself. He had. I watched him from the doorway, pulse slow but heavy in my throat. I'd seen Kade wounded before. I'd never seen him look uncertain. He turned at the sound of my step, his eyes, usually glacier still, flickering like a candle fighting wind. He was holding a cloth in one hand, stained with red. His other hand gripped the hilt of a ceremonial blade, still sheathed. Not drawn. Not yet. You should be resting, I said. He huffed. So should you. A pause. Then he set the blade on the table between us. Not a weapon. A symbol. I thought. Kade's voice dropped to something raw, roughened with things he hadn't said yet. I thought I'd lost the right to touch you. You didn't. I stepped forward, just enough to let him see it. The unspoken permission that had taken me 20 years and a war to find. His gaze dropped to the hollow of my throat, where the base of my scent gland lay visible, unguarded. A vulnerable place, quiet and soft and mine, but not denied to him. I meant it, I whispered. If you want to leave something on me, leave it. His throat bobbed. You're not afraid? I'm already yours, bite or not. Kade took one slow step closer. Like a man approaching fire he both worshipped and feared. His hands found my shoulders. Warm, steady, trembling. His head dipped, lips brushing my skin like a secret. I felt the rasp of breath, the flicker of his tongue against the gland. His teeth grazed, almost. Then he stopped, pulled back. I opened my eyes, confused. He stepped away from me, and before I could reach for him, he unsheathed the blade. Kade! He turned the edge against himself. The sound of skin slicing was soft, muffled, but it rang like thunder through my ribs. I choked on breath as blood welled across his shoulder, right over his own scent gland, torn open by his own hand. Not a cut for pain, a cut for sacrifice. He stood there, blood running down his chest like a vow made visible. And his voice, I won't own you. His gaze met mine, unwavering, fever bright. I won't let this world carve its laws into your body. If this is what it means to mark you, I'd rather be marked by you. My knees gave. I dropped to them like something breaking open from the inside out. Hands over my mouth, not to hide my sobs, but to hold them in, to keep them from shaking him more than they already had. But Kade didn't flinch. He dropped to his knees in front of me, chest heaving, blood smearing the floor between us. I reached up, hands trembling, and pressed my palms to his wounded shoulder, as if I could seal it closed with touch alone. "I wanted the mark," I whispered. He shook his head. "Not like that." And then, gods, I kissed it. Not his mouth, not his throat, but there, to the still bleeding cut over his severed gland. My mouth touched it softly, reverently, as his scent burst wild and raw around me, no longer bound to gland or rule or alpha design. My scent responded. We didn't fuse like perfect parts. We didn't click like machines. We bled into each other. His blood, my breath. My mouth, his tremor. A rush of pheromonal resonance rolled over us like a storm breaking beneath the skin, our bodies sinking, not in claim or chain, but in something older, deeper, untamed. No hierarchy, no collar, only bond. I sagged into his chest as his arms wrapped around me, strength and fragility crashing in equal measure. I felt his lips graze my temple. "You smell like choice," he murmured. And I thought, so do you. In the quiet that followed, no one spoke of marks, or contracts, or laws, just the way his pulse echoed in mine, and how, even bleeding, he held me like I was something sacred, like the scar he wore now wasn't for pain, but for freedom. Chapter 26, His Name Doesn't Belong to You. The wind that swept through the ruins of the old Wolf Tongue Hall carried no warmth, only dust and memory, and the bitter breath of things once sacred, now defiled. The archway stones still bore the carvings of laws older than teeth. But tonight, their meanings unraveled, syllable by syllable, as silence splintered under footsteps that should not have returned. Corvin stepped into the hall like a blade drawn slow from its sheath, gleaming, deliberate, already tasting blood. His presence dropped the temperature by degrees. Not the air, the instinctual core, the part of the spine that remembered cages and conditioning. The pressure in the room rose, thick as syrup and twice as suffocating. He wore no uniform now, only shadows. "Auren," he said softly, voice soaked in something too sweet to be mistaken for mercy. "You called me a scar once, but scars don't speak." A few members of the Free Howl Pack turned toward him with wariness, but not weapons, not yet. No one here had ever seen Corvin in the flesh. Only the echo of his tactics, the cold calculation of vanishing comrades, the hint of poison in blood work that never explained itself. But I had seen him. I had survived him. My fingers curled around the collar of my shirt. Kade moved beside me, broad shoulders coiled with alertness, his breath low and deep. I didn't need to look to know the tension in his throat, the way his jaw clenched, not from fear, but from a rage he refused to let rule him. Corvin's gaze flicked over him, dismissive. "I see you're still clinging to the stray," he said, addressing me, not him. "Cute, but you're mine. You marked me. Remember?" A hush rippled, a few whispers, some glances turned toward me, questioning. And that was his move. Not physical domination, narrative domination. Twist the story. Reclaim control. Say it loud enough in front of others that it becomes truth, unless someone dares to rip it back. I stepped forward, and with deliberate calm, I undid the first button of my shirt, then the second, and the third. A hush settled as I peeled back the fabric, baring the skin over my left shoulder, the place where his teeth had once broken through flesh. A faint scar remained there, not white, not clean, still warped around the edge like it had healed around shame, but never sealed. "Is this what you mean?" I asked, voice flat. Corvin's smile faltered. "This?" I touched the scar with 2 fingers, slow, deliberate. "Is your failure." A soft intake of breath somewhere in the crowd. I turned then, still bare-chested, and found Kade's gaze. Steady, unmoving, lit like he was trying to absorb my pain into his bones, if I'd let him. I crossed the space between us, the crowd parting in stunned silence. And when I reached him, I didn't touch his hand. I leaned forward and pressed my lips to the curve of his neck, right over the shallow ridge of a bite. His, not finished, not claimed, but his. His body shuddered beneath the touch, not from lust, but from the unbearable tenderness of being chosen in front of those who expected me to hide. I didn't. I turned back to Corvin, voice ringing across the cracked bones of the ancient hall. I belong to the one who didn't try to win me. The words snapped through the air like a whip. Corvin went still. Then something shifted in his posture. His weight no longer draped in theatrical languor, but braced, rigid. You think this is about love? He said, voice low and dangerous. You think what he gave you is more than what we shared? What we shared, I said, was programming. What he gave me was a choice. His nostrils flared. The edge of his lip curled. Not in rage, but something worse. Jealousy. You were mine, he said. I was made to be yours, I corrected. But I never chose you. I endured you. The final crack came not in his voice, but in the way his eyes flicked down to Kade's shoulder. And in that moment he realized. It didn't matter that I hadn't been bitten through to the gland, that no formal mark had been made, because in every room I entered now, I carried the scent of someone I would bleed for, who had bled for me. You smell like him, he spat. And you, I said coldly, smell like something I survived. The room was silent. Then Kade stepped forward, not with dominance, but with quiet steel. You have 3 seconds, he said to Corvin, voice graveled, deep and final. To leave this ground, or you'll see what I do to wolves who try to take what was never theirs. Corvin looked at him, looked at me, and for one fractured moment, I thought he might back down. Then he smiled. Keep your pet, he murmured. For now. Let's see how long he stays tame. Then he vanished, back into the shadows like he'd never stood there at all. But the weight of what had passed lingered. Heavy, unshakable. The crowd around us slowly dispersed, eyes wide, heads bowed, not out of shame, but reverence. Something had shifted. I had shifted. No longer a ghost of someone's design, but a man who could bear his scars in the daylight. Kade reached for me again, and this time, I let him pull me close, skin still warm from where I'd kissed his wound. I'm not going anywhere, I whispered against his chest. His voice rumbled above me, rough with something undone. Then neither am I. And for the first time I believed it, not because he said it, but because I'd claimed it. Chapter 27, Wolves That Don't Obey. The howl didn't come from the mountains. Came from beneath. Low, distorted, and not entirely alive. The cry echoed through the stone bones of the hollow crown like an infection. Slow, hungry, spreading. Kade was already on his feet before the last echo faded. I had never seen him move like that before. Not the fluid grace of an alpha in control, but something snapped loose and vicious. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. We both knew who had come, and what he'd brought with him. By the time we reached the front hall, the doors were shuddering under the weight of fists that weren't entirely human. Wood groaned. Hinges screamed. Then silence. The kind that stands on its toes. Then, boom. The doors cracked, not from battering, but from pressure. Spiritual. Phenomenal. The kind that claws under your ribs and makes your spine forget you ever stood upright. I staggered. Kade's body was already in front of mine. But it was too late. The doors opened, and the nightmares walked in. They didn't look like monsters. They looked like men once. Now their skin bore surgical runes that glowed faintly with corrupted serum. Their eyes reflected nothing. Their chests rose in perfect sync, as if breath was assigned. And their pheromones, gods, their pheromones were like a rot in the air. Not desire, not threat, control. 10 of them, maybe more. And behind them, Corvin. He wore white again. White that glowed in the dark like a lie made of moonlight. This, he said, gesturing to the army of broken alpha weapons, is what happens when you strip the bond from wolves and give them only purpose. His eyes met mine. Recognize them, Auren? I did. Pieces of them. Phrases. Techniques. They moved like echoes of my own body. Taut hands, calibrated strikes. Wolves trained not to feel, only to end. They were born from your design, he murmured. Perfected in mine. Kade bared his teeth beside me. You call that perfection? He growled. I've seen corpses with more soul. Corvin tilted his head. Not corpses. Instruments. And I've come to retune the one that got away. The wall behind us cracked. They had flanked the palace. How had we not sensed it? Because they didn't radiate intent. They weren't hunters. They were ghosts. And I was the grave they wanted. I spun, already shifting my weight, already calculating. We didn't have time. There were too many. Kade. No. His hand caught mine, breath harsh in my ear. I'm not letting them near you. The first blow came from the left, silent, precise. I dodged, barely. Another from behind. Kade countered, fangs flashing. His body a wall of heat and fury. But they kept coming. 2 broke toward the side hallway, cutting off our escape. 3 rushed me directly. And I knew them. I knew their steps like I knew my heartbeat. Unit D7. One of them rasped. Asset Prime, said another. Return. I screamed. Not from pain. From the sound of their voices. Like puppets. Like broken things that still remembered me. I fought. Gods, I fought. But I felt it breaking. My control. My scent flooded the hall. Unfiltered. Raw. The chemical suppression I'd relied on could not hold against this. They responded to it like addicts catching a whiff of something stronger than death. And the more I fought, the more they fed. Kade saw it. He moved like fury incarnate, slashing one across the throat, but too slow. A second embedded corrosive claws into his shoulder, twisting. Kade! I screamed. He spun, his other hand yanking the attacker off him, blood flying. But I saw it. The wound wasn't clean. It burned. He dropped to one knee, breath ragged. No, I rasped, lunging forward, teeth bared. But Corvin only watched and smiled. He wasn't here to win. Not today. He was here to break us first. I let go. Of shame. Of suppression. Of everything that ever told me my scent, my bond, my wolf was a weapon too dangerous to love. I let it burn. The pheromone surge hit like a sonic quake. Waves of raw instinct, half maddened, half divine, crashing over the enemy. The 3 closest to me staggered. One dropped. Another whimpered. The third clutched its own throat, choking on a scent too pure to be corrupted. They'd been trained to feel nothing, but not trained to resist me. I felt the shift in the air. Kade's eyes locked on mine, fever bright, blood at the edge of his mouth. I said, I'm not letting them touch you, he growled again. And then, despite the pain, despite the rot in his wound, he surged forward, through the line, straight to me. His arm wrapped around my waist just as one of the remaining wolves lunged with a toxin blade. The blade met Kade's back instead of mine. He gasped, and I screamed. Everything went white. Pheromones tore through the air in a vortex, stripping paint from walls, cracking stone. Even Corvin flinched. I turned, body no longer only mine. Bones cracked. Claws tore from my fingertips. My voice, when it left my throat, was not human. And I didn't run. I leapt. Toward them. Toward him. For Kade. Only for him. Chapter 28. The first sound I made as a wolf. It wasn't blood that woke the scream in my throat. It wasn't even pain. It was the silence. Kade lay on the cracked altar stones like something torn from a battlefield poem. Not a man. His blood painted the runes on the floor, soaking into ancient symbols meant to summon blessings, now drowning in the cost of him. His chest rose, then faltered. Rose again, less. And all around us the wolves came. Not true wolves. Not ours. The broken ones. The half-made. the ones Corvin built and let rot in their own obedience. They circled through the shattered gardens of the Hollow Crown like flies drawn to meet too long left in the sun. Their footsteps were too soft. Their heads twitched in fractured rhythm. Their mouths never closed. They didn't speak. They listened. To my scent. To my heart. To the crack in my soul as I knelt beside Kade and realized he wasn't breathing properly anymore. Something inside me, something stitched from too many years of control and blade-edge training, tore. I stood. The first one lunged. And I didn't move. I changed. Not into full wolf. No. Not even nature would allow me that mercy. My spine arched until it cracked. Fingers split at the seams of bone and claw. My jaw lengthened. Not fully, just enough to burn. And something ancient howled through my ribs. A sound left my throat. Not human. Not even wolf. Something older than both. The sky shivered. The wolves froze. For a heartbeat the world bent. And then chaos. They turned on each other. Howling. Gnashing. Screaming through teeth not made for thought. Some clawed at their own skulls, bloodied and blind. Others threw themselves at the cracked altar, shrieking with need for my scent, my presence, my command. I didn't give it. I gave them pain instead. I moved through the wreckage like something reborn, half-shifted, wholly mine. My bare feet cracked stone, pheromones pouring from every line of torn skin. I tore through 3 of them before I even realized my hands were bleeding. And the rest? They fell. Not because I killed them, but because their minds broke first. Because wolves that aren't allowed to want can't survive desire. And I wanted him. Kade? I rasped, stumbling back to the altar as the last of the wolves twitched and fell into silence behind me. He didn't stir. His skin had gone ash-gray beneath the blood. Too quiet, too still. I collapsed beside him, hand shaking as I reached for his. No strength, no grip. The world narrowed. I curled over him. My half-shifted claws scraped against the fabric of his torn shirt as I pressed my face to the only part of him still warm, the hollow of his throat, soaked in sweat and fever. I waited. I whispered. No answer. I trained myself not to feel, just for this. Still nothing. My voice broke. I was going to wait until we were safe, until I'd earned it, until I was better. Silence. Tighter now. A noose around my chest. But I could smell him, even in the blood and rot. Still Kade. Still mine. I'm not better, I choked. But God's, I want to be. With you. He didn't move. I pressed my lips to his shoulder, just above the ruined wound. My pheromones flared, not seductive, not even conscious. They ached, and then the words slipped out, soft, ragged, like a confession made in death. Don't die, I whispered. I already can't wait anymore. The sky cracked above us, but he didn't move, and I stayed curled there, half wolf, half broken, with my claws in his blood and my heart too full of him to hold anything else. Chapter 29. Your wound, my mark. The fire in the hearth was down to its last ember. Kade hadn't stirred in 7 hours. The walls of the wolf hall held their breath around us, tapestries whispering with each flicker of flame, windows cracked with frost. No footsteps echoed. No breath rose from the watchers outside the door. The free howl wolves had long stopped asking questions, because they knew their alpha was slipping. And I had no more edges to hold myself upright. I sat beside him, legs tucked to my chest, spine curved like the husk of a broken blade. Kade lay on the wide stone bed wrapped in too many layers, yet still cold. The sheets had long soaked through with fever sweat. The scent of burnt nerves, iron, and ash clung to the linens like ghosts that refused to leave. The wound on his shoulder had gone from deep to rotten, not from lack of healing, but from what tore it, the experimental corrosive compound used by Corvin's wolves. It didn't just pierce skin, it unstitched instinct. It ate through the gland just beneath the collarbone, the one every alpha bore like a pulse, the one that made them more than human, the one that made him, him. and it was gone. With it, the bond tether that used to hum between us, silent, sure, had gone mute. There was nothing now. No echo, no pulse, just silence. Except my own. I leaned forward, brushed his hair back, and kissed his brow. "You're still warm there," I murmured. "Or maybe it's just the memory of you." No answer. Only the soft clink of my own breathing unraveling. I reached for the cloth draped over his side, peeled it away with slow reverence. My fingers trembled, not from fear, but restraint. His left shoulder was bandaged. Layers of linen and resin thorn poultice wrapped tight across the ragged site where his scent gland had been, where no mark could ever go again. And yet, I pressed my forehead to it, closed my eyes, and breathed him in, not because he'd asked, because I needed to remember the taste of his skin, the heat of his breath in the moments before battle, the way his hands had always hovered, never pressed, around my hips, because if he died now, he'd go without knowing that I'd finally chosen him, not out of obligation, not out of instinct, but because I wanted to leave something behind on him too, even if no one would ever see it. I climbed into the bed, careful, reverent, each motion as quiet as prayer. Laid beside him, my hand found his cheek. The hollow of it had grown colder, but his lips, still parted just enough for me to pretend he was whispering something back. "I told you," I breathed, curling close enough that our chests aligned. "I wasn't going to run again." No answer, so I gave him mine. I pressed my mouth to his ear. "Whether or not you hear this, it doesn't matter." I sat up, straddling his hips with the grace of a ritualist kneeling before a shrine. Then I bent, and with bared teeth, I bit, not to hurt, not to claim, just deep enough, just long enough, to leave a memory, a trace of warmth in the destroyed edges of what had been taken from him, a kiss made of teeth, an offering without expectation. And when I pulled back, my mouth was wet with blood. But there was no pain in me, only peace. The pheromones that spilled from me weren't wild anymore. They were still, heavy, a sea without wind. And in that quiet, something clicked. Not a sound, not a physical shift, but I felt it, the hum of his soul brushing mine, a resonance, a signature without anchor, a tether drawn from within, not muscle, not skin, not even scent, but something deeper, something that would not fade even if his body did. A soul mark, unseen, unwritten, unbreakable. I gasped, and in the stillness his lips twitched, just once. No words, just a pull, as if his body remembered me too. "I'll stay," I whispered, lowering myself beside him again. He didn't move, but my pheromones curled gently around his chest, warming the air, thawing the frost at the corners of the stone window, letting the fire catch again, letting me hope. Chapter 30. When he howled my name, the wind didn't blow on the high stone tower anymore. It waited like I did, on bruised knees, spine bent, arms around the body that still hadn't moved in nearly a day. Kade's breath came like memory, soft, frayed, stuttering as though even his lungs weren't certain he belonged to this world anymore. The wound at his shoulder had scabbed into black glass, shining like something that had long since stopped bleeding, but wouldn't stop burning. I held him against me, back pressed to the broken edge of the parapet, legs splayed out with his torso heavy across my lap, one hand clutching what was left of his cloak. The battlefields below were still, and then they weren't. The remaining experimental wolves, those half-born shadows of a weapon I might have become, began to circle again, drifting around the shattered gates. Their eyes gleamed with glassy recognition. They hadn't retreated. They'd paused, waiting for their signal. Corvin's signal. He was somewhere, watching, always. I raised my chin toward the stars. The sky above was bruised black and purple. No moon dared look down on what we had become. And still I did not run. Instead I called, not with words, not with my voice, but with everything I had left in me, tore out of me like a scream born in bone. A howl, low, long carved from my diaphragm and sharpened on years of silence. It echoed not through the throat, but through my scent, my pulse, my soul. And Omega's howl wasn't meant to command. But this one did. Because I was no longer just Omega. I was Auren. I was mine. And I would not let them take him from me. Not when I had just begun to let myself feel. Not when I had finally chosen to stay. The sound fractured the stillness. Wolves froze mid-step. Snarls clipped shut like knives turned to ice. Even the stars above seemed to flinch. Then, a rasp. Just barely audible beneath my heartbeat and breath and the dying tail of that howl. You finally called me by my name. I looked down. Kade's mouth was smeared red. His teeth were bared faintly. Blood welled in the corners of his lips. But his eyes, silver, dull, but open, and fixed on me. I had no words. None. Only his name now in my mouth. Kade. He let out a wet breath. Then the light went out again. His body sagged, but it didn't feel like a death. It felt like a promise being kept. I held him tighter, and far across the ashen line of broken trees, across the remnants of the South Forest where no song had touched in years, Corvin watched, his face pale as winter's edge, lips pressed thin, but shaking. The last of the calm links shattered in his gloved hand. He'd heard it, felt it. That howl had carved through the ruins of every tether he'd ever buried in me. He was no longer inside me, and I had never been his. I saw the shift in him even from here. The flicker of calculation turned to flame. Then he turned, slower than needed, and with a grace that made my stomach knot, slit the throats of his own remaining scouts. Not even hesitating, just removing the noise. Removing the ones who'd once warned him against this. Corvin stepped through their blood without breaking stride. His voice, though I didn't hear it with ears, crackled through the ash-stained bond like static reanimated. I don't want to possess you anymore, Auren. I want you to watch. Watch your lover die, while I burn everything your love ever dared save. His mind fractured inwards. I felt it like a crack in old glass. He wasn't trying to win now. He was trying to make it hurt. He raised a hand, and from behind him, dragged forward what looked like a metallic monolith. No, not metal. Not solid. Pulsed. A living conduit. Rings of signal coils spun with a low harmonic vibration. Inside them, dozens of amber vials, glowing like venom. The signal core, and at its heart, I knew without being told, was a fragment of my blood. One taken in the early years, spliced, amplified, twisted into a psychic wave so purely destructive it could fry every bond, every instinct, in a wolf-born body. He called it the pheromonic annihilation code, and it had my name in its source. You made me, Corvin whispered through the link, but now I'm your extinction. I turned my gaze away from the distant shimmer of the device. Lowered it again to Kade, his body slack, his heart slowing. But my tears had already begun to fall. Not red, not burning, but clear, because I had nothing else left to give, except everything. So I curled myself over him, pressed my chest to his, our foreheads barely touching, and I whispered, "If you die, I will not scream. I will not fight. I will burn." Chapter 31, The Burn That Never Leaves. The first thing Auren smelled was fire. Not smoke. Fire. The kind that lived in the marrow, that didn't need air to burn. That came from inside the ribcage and clung to your scent like guilt. Ash danced in the air around the ruins of the old training pit. Gray-black flakes drifting like memories that had teeth. Somewhere in the center, a fight was unfolding. One that didn't feel like survival. Felt like penance. Kade's body moved like a weapon that had already accepted its breaking. Half shifted, blood slicked. His spine arched in a curve that used to mean reverence but now only meant rage. The jagged fur down his arms shimmered under moonlight, and his breath came out in bursts of vapor so hot the air around him bent. 3 of the experimental units circled him, each a twisted ghost of alpha potential. Taller, feral. Eyes that reflected nothing but programming. Their growls didn't sound like wolves. They sounded like orders. Auren could barely watch. Kade's claws tore across one's chest, silver spray. But a second sank its rot-laced fangs into his side. The third came from behind, striking like memory always did, unseen until it was too deep to dislodge. Kade staggered, and still didn't fall. He turned with a snarl that didn't come from his throat, came from his bones. But Auren knew the moment it happened. The poison entered, not physical but biochemical, designed to corrupt. Something Corvin had layered into their blood, a devouring signal keyed to Kade's DNA. He dropped to one knee. Auren ran. He didn't think, didn't breathe. The ruined training ground was a graveyard of every wolf who'd ever learned to obey. And now it was his crucible. He leapt over a broken pylon, slid down the cratered slope, information pouring from his skin in waves, not as command, but as call. Not a dominance burst, but a witnessing. He felt it before it happened. In the remnants of the pit walls, curled like lost dogs in the shadow of steel girders, lay the dormant clones, the earlier models of himself, half-grown, lobotomized, waiting, and they heard him. Auren unleashed. Every seal, every hold, every lie he'd told his own body to keep it silent. He released his scent like detonation. The air rippled. The clones howled, not in loyalty, but in confusion, in fracture. The code Corvin buried in their minds began to shatter. And for the first time in their false-born lives, they turned. On each other. On the 3 units attacking Kade. On anything that still bore Corvin's tether. The pit became chaos. Blood sprayed in streaks like writing on old walls. And in the center of it, Auren remembered. Not the first time he killed. The first time he enjoyed it. He was 10. Corvin had told him the boy deserved it. That mercy was weakness and weapons did not weep. And after Auren's hand had pressed the injector to the boy's throat, after the spasms stopped, Corvin had kissed his temple. "Good," he'd whispered. "Now you know what you are." And then, days later, when Auren refused to eat, Corvin had held him like a lover, murmuring sweetly, "We'll reset your cycle. Just rest. You're mine always." Auren blinked through the smoke. His body was already halfway down the slope. Kade was slumped against a broken column, claw marks trailing down his shoulder and ribs. His eyes were half open, unfocused, bleeding silver at the edges from the venom. Auren dropped to his knees, held his face in both hands. "Kade," he rasped, throat tight with everything unsaid. Kade's lips barely moved. "If you save me." A pause. His breath hitched. "Does that mean he wins?" Auren's world tilted. "No," he whispered. Then louder, fiercer. "No." He pressed his forehead to Kade's, ignoring the blood, ignoring the burn of his own glands bursting wide with bond stimulus. "You don't understand. Saving you is the only thing that keeps me from being what he made me." Kade shuddered. His voice was barely audible. "Then don't hold back." Auren blinked. "Kade, don't protect me." The words sounded like love and surrender, like the permission no Alpha had ever given an Omega before. Auren shook. His control frayed, fractured, and something darker inside him said, "Then burn." He leaned in, let his scent pour free, let his fingers bury in blood-matted hair, let his lips graze across the edge of a ruined collarbone. And for just a second, the battlefield held its breath, because the Omega didn't fall to his knees. He rose, and in his wake, the clones howled with him, not because he ordered them, but because for the first time, they'd seen a wolf become his own fire. And they followed. Chapter 32, Mate Bond Cannot Save Me. The room was carved into silence. Heavy, white, too clean. Auren sat cross-legged on the stone floor beside Kade's unmoving body, wrapped in the soft hum of the isolation chamber's hum. Around them, layers of reinforced shielding hummed low and cold, meant to suppress scent, sever bonds, muffle instinct. A place where wolves could neither feel nor be felt. But Auren wasn't a wolf anymore. He was something broken, and breaking things still. Kade lay bare-chested on the med slab, pale as cut marble, his body wrapped in linen where metal couldn't touch him. The wound at his shoulder had turned black at the edges, the venom having eaten through every defense. His gland was gone, scorched out by the same ruin meant to destroy every last vestige of dominance. But he had held the line. He had shielded Auren with his body, even as it tore itself apart. And now he wouldn't wake. Auren's fingers trembled as he reached out, traced the edge of the bandage where the gland used to be. He didn't cry. There were no more tears left. Not since the last howl shattered the battlefield and his voice finally said Kade's name out loud. The silence that followed had been louder than war. He leaned forward, letting his forehead rest against Kade's, and for a moment the world narrowed to skin, bone, the faintest warmth beneath frozen flesh. "I should have marked you sooner," he whispered, voice thin and cracked. "Should have told you I belonged to you when it would have mattered." A pause. "I didn't want to be owned. Didn't want to need you like that." His lips trembled. "But you never tried to own me." He pulled back, looked down. Kade's face was peaceful. Too peaceful. Like death had brushed past and lingered in the corners. "No more waiting," Auren breathed. He bent down, pressed a kiss to Kade's temple, another to his brow, and finally, to the ruined space where a gland had once pulsed beneath skin. The moment his mouth touched scar tissue, something inside shattered. Auren didn't push his scent. He didn't need to. His entire body opened without command, scent flooding the sealed room like a rising tide. Warm, deep, devastating. A song of fire and surrender. The mate bond answered, raw and ragged, rising from what was left of Kade's spirit like a whisper clawing up through the grave. The mark formed, not from bite, but from belief. Auren didn't pull back. He stayed there, lips pressed to ruined flesh, fingers curled in blood-damp linen, throat choking on everything he couldn't afford to say aloud. Because this wasn't for healing. It was for remembrance. Let the world forget them. Let the gods turn away. Let every bond collapse. But this scar? This kiss? This scent shared in the cold and quiet? It would remember. He felt it begin to thread. The bond. Tearing through walls that should have been dead. Seeking. Anchoring. And for one blinding second, Kade breathed. Inhaled Auren's scent like it was air after drowning. His eyes opened. Silver irises dilated wide. "Or," he rasped. But the bond hit full force. Like lightning striking open ground. Kade's body arched, every nerve screaming in resonance. And Auren felt the reverberation. Not pull, not comfort, but recoil. His spine snapped back, mouth open. Blood poured from his nose, his lips, his eyes. He crashed onto the cold floor, gasping, limbs seizing. Because it wasn't connection. It was too strong, too wounded, too late. He tried to crawl back. His vision spun in red-black bloom. Kade's voice soft, barely there. "Auren." And then silence. Not unconsciousness, but the kind of silence only pain brings. The bond had formed, but it didn't save. Cost. He could feel it burning in his bones, rewriting marrow. As if the bond was no longer a joining but an offering. A sacrificial fire lit by desperate hands. "Don't die," he whispered, through blood and static. "I just got brave enough to love you." The words fell into the white chamber. No one caught them. The walls didn't echo, but the mark remained, alive, and waiting. Chapter 33. The key was always me. The door hissed open with a breath like the grave. Auren stepped inside. The air inside the control tower was colder than outside. Not by degrees but by design. It wasn't made for life. It was made for containment, for stillness, for silence that could never be broken from within. He passed rows of pulse-veined cables that throbbed with the echo of wolves long devoured by the system. Their scents were gone, but their agony lingered like static in the floor. He didn't flinch. He couldn't afford to. Not when the path was finally clear. Not when Kade was still breathing. Not when Corvin was still alive. The chamber at the core of the tower opened like a throat. Circular, white, padded in nerve-reactive sensors. The neural link cradle rose from the center, no larger than a throne, no warmer than a grave. Auren's footsteps didn't echo, but something inside him did. He stood before the interface, closed his eyes, and for a breath he let the memories come. The first time someone tried to mark him. The first hand on his nape, firm and possessive. The first heat, rough voice that said, "You were made for someone like me." The kiss that tasted like vinegar and iron. And the blood that sprayed when he moved without thought, slicing the man's throat open with a needle hidden beneath his tongue. He had been ate and still warm with someone else's scent. Afterward, they dragged him back to the lab, cleaned him, injected him, whispered promises and punishments and new programming. They told him he had no name, only purpose, but he remembered that kiss. He remembered how it burned. He remembered the next one too. Corvin had been the first to kiss him and not punish him afterward. His touch had been cool, his voice coiled silk. "Let me show you what freedom tastes like." Tasted like obedience. It smelled like prison. Auren opened his eyes. There was no obedience left in him now. Only flame. He stepped into the neural cradle. Let the tendrils wrap around his wrists, spine, temples. They hissed, then sighed, as if tasting something it had waited years for. He didn't resist. He offered. The neural spike slid into the back of his neck. He arched but didn't cry out. Instead, he whispered, "Take me in." The system did. Auren felt himself tear into 100 selves. Memory and instinct and scent and thought, split across data streams and frequencies he didn't understand, but had always been meant for. They had built the wolf net from his DNA. His instincts, his scent. He had always been the failsafe, the lock, and the key. In the heart of the interface, a voice rose. Low, familiar, slithering. "Well?" Corvin murmured, materializing from the data fog like a phantom draped in shadow. "You brought yourself home." His eyes weren't black this time. They were mirrors, and Auren saw himself in them. "You're here to surrender," Corvin said, tilting his head. "You've finally realized you need me to end it." Auren smiled. Slow, sharp. "No," he said. "I came to end you." The illusion around Corvin flickered. The confidence in his voice twisted. "You can't override the system without me," he said, voice cracking. "I'm its master frequency." You're its parasite," Auren cut in. "But I was the source code." He stepped forward. The data shifted like water around him. He bled scent in all directions, pure, undiluted omega frequency so sharp it sliced the corrupted threads apart like razors. Corvin staggered. "You don't know what you're doing," he said, too fast. "You'll destroy everything. Yourself." "Yes," Auren said. Then he smiled wider. "That's the point." He raised both arms. Let the data lines burrow into his skin. Let his scent spiral outward through the network like wildfire. Corvin screamed, "You need me." Auren met his eyes and said, soft as a vow, "You fear it's not that I'll leave you, but that I finally don't need you." The core began to burn. Threads of light slashed through the tower, veins exploding with golden red energy as Auren's bond signature overloaded the system. Every corrupted algorithm that had been built on him cracked. His memories weren't static anymore. They were weapons. They were fire. He closed his eyes, thought of Kade, the scent of him, the warmth, the way he never demanded but always waited. The man who hadn't tried to tame him, only to choose him. Auren whispered his name one last time. Kade. And everything inside the system began to burn. Chapter 34, Not Yours. Not anymore. The sky above the hollow crown had never burned like this. Not when the laboratories fell. Not when the first Alpha Kings died screaming on their thrones. Not even when the Free Howl Pact raised their banner under a moon choked in ash. But now, Fire clung to the heavens like grief, molten and aching. A howl was stitched into every flicker of flame. And the wolf who lit it all walked barefoot through the ruin, carrying the man he loved. Auren's arms trembled around Kade's limp weight. Blood soaked into his tunic, not all of it Kade's. His own back had been slashed open by signal overload, raw lines of pain tearing through skin where scent glands had ruptured under pressure. Still, he didn't stop. Not when Corvin's voice echoed across the battlefield like a god's failed echo. Not when the last of the free howl wolves had scattered, driven mad or mute by the scent collapse Corvin had unleashed. Not even when the air turned metallic, thick with ozone and betrayal. At the base of the final tower, the one with the heart of the wolf core burning at its peak, Auren knelt. He lowered Kade down gently, cradling his head like a promise. The alpha's eyes were closed, brow furrowed in pain, mouth slack. His chest rose and fell in shallow stutters. Barely there, but there. Auren leaned close, their foreheads touched. The silence between them wasn't empty, pulsed. It sang, somewhere between bond and ache. "I told you I wouldn't run," Auren whispered, voice hoarse. "But I never told you I'd stay this way." He reached up, brushed his knuckles over Kade's jaw. "And I'm sorry for that." He kissed him, not with desperation, but with completion. With the fullness of something that didn't need to last forever to matter more than time. Then, slowly, Auren stood. He turned toward the tower. The ground vibrated with the heartbeat of something ancient and corrupted. A final wolf engine designed to tear obedience from memory and twist it into signal. It had no name, only a function. Control. It had once been built from him. It would end with him. From the flames above, Corvin descended. Not like a man, like a ghost unmade. His eyes were cracked obsidian, veins spidering across pale skin like something unraveling from the inside. His scent was chaos, all frequencies at once, all wrong. "You still think this is yours to stop?" he rasped, voice static-laced. "Even now, when you've already lost." Auren met his gaze, calm, certain. "I'm not yours." Corvin laughed, the sound jagged. "You were mine from the first scream. I trained you, touched you, marked you in ways you can't scrub out. Even if you burn, even if you die, you'll die carrying me." Auren tilted his head, silver eyes sharp. "Then let me show you how a scar learns to bleed on its own terms." And he howled. Not a cry for help, not a declaration. It was a detonation. The sound tore through the tower, through every bone, through the dirt, through the remaining threads of the wolf core's corrupted system. It wasn't just sound. It was memory, rage, choice, and it tore everything open. From the sky, fire fell. The tower split at its center. Veins of red light bleeding from its seams like arteries sliced open. The network screamed as Auren's howl reprogrammed it, not with submission, but with will. And then he ran, through the shattering storm, through scent shards and data static, into the heart of the collapsing system. Corvin followed. Their bodies collided in the flame light, claws and skin and raw power meeting in a blur of scent and shriek. Auren didn't fight to win. He fought to end. "You think you were the cage?" he gasped, breath hot against Corvin's throat as they struggled. "You were the lock," he said, fangs bared, eyes molten. "But I'm the key." And he drove his voice, his frequency, into the final node. The blast rippled through the ruins like the breath of a god. Corvin screamed as light split his form apart, his molecules separating in a dance of fury and betrayal. "You think you're free?" he roared. "You're just the last scar I never got to keep." Auren smiled. A single tear slid down his cheek, vaporized before it could fall. "Not yours." The light consumed them both. Far below, Kade stirred. His eyes cracked open. He felt the howl before he heard it. It was his name, not shouted, not begged, just given. And then it was gone. The fire above winked out. The tower collapsed, and the hollow crown fell into silence. Chapter 35, A World Without His Voice. The wind didn't carry his scent anymore. Kade clawed his way out from the jagged split in the earth, blood-streaked snow hissing beneath his palms. The sky above Fongspire crater hung gray and hollow, echoing the silence that had followed the last scream. His last scream. His throat, raw from a howl that had torn from his soul more than from his voice, now refused to make a sound. Even as he tried, lips parted, body trembling, nothing came. No growl, no howl, no sound. Only the crackle of something ending inside him. Beneath the ruined sky, the world had gone still. The twisted wreckage of laboratories lay crushed beneath flame and time. Wires tangled with ash, broken tanks reflecting the faces of those who should never have survived. They came from the shadows one by one. Pale scars, burnt eyes, limbs reshaped by pain and syringes. Survivors, experiments, wolves that had been forced to forget their names, their bodies, their voices. Now they emerged like ghosts from the frostbitten husk of Fongspire. Dozens, then hundreds, quiet, watching. Kade stumbled to his feet. The crater that once echoed with orders and cries now answered only to silence. But then, a single voice, soft, from somewhere behind. We all heard it. Kade turned, half mad with hope. But it wasn't him. It was a young one, half his face marked by burn lines, voice rasping but steady. He took a step forward and bowed his head, not in subjugation, but in mourning. He called your name. More followed. A tall she-wolf with melted cybernetics on her arms. An older wolf with glass for one eye. A child no older than 10 with claws too long for his hands. We all heard him, they whispered. Auren. The name came like a fracture through Kade's chest. A breaking that had no blood, no scream, no escape. He dropped to his knees, spine bowed by the weight of everything he'd held back. The place where they had fought was now only dust. No body, no remains. Just the burnt chemical scent of where 2 lives had once burned so bright they destroyed a god. The bond was gone. And yet, he could still feel the echo in his bones. Faint, like breath in winter. The others gathered, silent, forming a wide, loose circle around the crater's edge. Not one of them spoke again. Not one of them needed to. They had heard the voice of a god not born, but made. Kade lifted his head to the wind, broken, blistered, hollow. And though his throat gave him no sound, his heart spoke louder than any alpha's order. You won. I'm still here. His hands pressed to the earth. Not in worship, not in surrender, in promise, in grief, and in love. Chapter 36, The Scar Beneath the Skin. They rebuilt the altar from the bones of the fallen. Not literal bones, though there were plenty, scattered and sun-bleached across the ruin, but from the iron-veined stone of the hollow crown's collapsed eastern flank. Shards of pillars once used to bind, chains once gilded for show, now reforged into something that didn't demand obedience. Something that whispered, remember him. Kade stood beneath the pale light of a moon that no longer held any warmth, holding the glass vial between his fingers like it was a soul. Maybe it was. Inside, faint but still volatile, shimmered the final trace of Auren's scent. Not his body, not his voice, just the phantom memory of who he was. It pulsed faintly in rhythm with the wind, like breath in sleep. Kade hadn't slept since the crater. Couldn't. Dreams had become landmines. Even silence had begun to ache. He knelt slowly, his body still stiff, still split at the seams from battle, and slid the vial into the hollow of the markstone. A small cavity at the heart of the new altar, carved with no religious symbol, no crest, no pack name. Just one line, inscribed in jagged hand, for the wolves who were never given names. He locked the stone in place, sealing it. Then from the leather satchel slung at his side, he drew parchment, frayed at the corners. His handwriting, dark and uneven, scrawled down the center like a wound. He read it aloud, quiet, but clear. This is not a grave. This is not forgiveness. This is not the end. If you were born from rupture, if your teeth came in before your name, if you were told your howl was too loud, you are welcome here. If you've never been marked, or were marked too many times, if your body isn't quiet, if your bond has no scent, then this is your place. You do not have to be good. You only have to be free. He placed the parchment beside the stone, and then stepped back. The new altar stood in the center of the ruined hall, where the Alpha Kings had once ruled in shadowed power. The floor was uneven. The walls still bore claw marks and scorch lines from the final night. But this space no longer belonged to kings. It belonged to those who had nothing left but memory. Kade turned away, but his body didn't follow. It stalled, like every fiber of him still waited for a hand to reach from behind and touch his spine. Not to lead, just to remind him he wasn't alone in it. But it didn't come. The echo of the mate bond was long gone, scorched in that final detonation. Only the ache remained. As the stars bled their slow fire into the night, he walked up the rise of the old tower steps. Every movement burned. Every breath rattled like something broken. At the summit, he stared out over the rebuilt clearing. A few others stood at its edge, young wolves, unsorted, unclaimed, watching from a distance, unsure whether they belonged. They did. And one day he would teach them that. But not tonight. Tonight, he let himself crumble in private. The wind tore at his cloak as he knelt beside the cold stone railing, spine pressed to the edge as if anchoring himself to the last place he'd kissed Auren's mouth. He tilted his head toward the stars. His voice, when it came, was rough and small. "You didn't teach me how to forget," he whispered. And this time, this one time, he let the tears fall. No noise, no shame, just salt, just the scar beneath the skin, aching like it had only been carved an hour ago. He stayed there until dawn, alone, but not unguarded. The scent in the stone altar below still pulsed, still claimed the air, still whispered of the boy who refused to be owned. And in that breath of memory, something sacred bloomed. Not love, not legacy, just the freedom to remain broken and still worth something. Chapter 37, Wolves That Remember. The fire was dying low in the circle pit, and the scent of ash clung to the wind like a lullaby left unsung. They gathered beneath the open sky, where no walls caged the stars and no throne waited behind their backs. Just wolves, quiet and warm, sprawled on old pelts and repurposed blankets, some still bearing the tags of their laboratory numbers. They called it the free ring now. It wasn't a pack. It wasn't even a place. It was a choice. And tonight, a new voice would hear the story for the first time. A boy sat cross-legged near the edge of the circle, his knees tucked under his chin, eyes too big for his narrow face. His coat still smelled of antiseptic. His neck bore the faint bruises of collar restraints. But his gaze was hungry, not for food, for history, for a name that meant something. The storyteller was older, barely 17, but already marked by too many things to count. A faded cereal on the wrist, a scar across his brow that split when he smiled. He smiled now, leaning close to the boy, voice pitched just above the crackling flames. "You want to know about him?" the older boy said. The child nodded. The storyteller looked toward the altar stone, barely visible in the distance, outlined only by the silver glow of moonlight brushing its edges. Then he said, "There was once an Omega who never wore a bond mark. Not because no one tried, but because he refused." The fire hissed as he shifted, voice low and even, almost reverent. "He wasn't born, not like us. He was made, sharpened, spilled into the world with no scent of his own, just the code of someone else's hunger. But when they told him to submit, he laughed. And when they ordered him to kill, he looked them in the eyes and asked why. Did he escape?" the boy asked, his voice barely a whisper. "No," the elder said. "He stayed, and changed everything." The boy's brow furrowed. "But if he stayed, why didn't he survive?" A pause. Then, a smile not of joy, but of something deeper, something raw. "He did." The boy blinked. "But they said he died." Another pause, this one longer, and then, with the smallest shake of his head, the older wolf murmured, "He became the reason we know how to survive. He's in the way you listen when no one's talking. He's in the breath you hold before you bare your throat. He's in your howl. When it finally comes, he'll be there. That's when he comes back." The boy didn't speak. He only curled closer to the warmth, his hand pressed tight to his chest. And behind them all, watching from the edge of the clearing, Kade stood. Not beside the fire, not inside the ring, just watching. His cloak billowed softly behind him, stirring as the wind rose. The edge lifted just enough to reveal what hadn't healed, the faint, silvery indentation on his shoulder, where Auren had once marked him with lips instead of teeth. No one else had ever touched it. No one ever would. Kade didn't move when the story ended. Didn't speak when the circle quieted. He turned, instead, toward the cliff overlooking the Hollow Crown's ruins. His hand brushed the stone railing, cool beneath his palm, etched with frost and old names. He didn't need to say anything. The air remembered for him. So did the bite. And somewhere in the scattered stars overhead, a silence lingered that was not empty, but waiting. Not grief, not finality, something else. Something like legacy. Chapter 38. Epilogue. When Wolves Don't Obey. The night was made of breath and frost and a silence too vast for the earth to hold. Above the fractured valley where once the Hollow Crown ruled, the stars burned low and slow, as if waiting, as if remembering. The boy stood alone on the high stone ledge, barefoot, bare-throated. No scent upon him yet, no name whispered through the bond lines. Only the ache in his chest, and the fire beneath it. He didn't know why he'd come, only that his pulse had led him here, each footstep a beat toward something ancient. Something buried not in stone or ruin, but in the marrow of his blood. He was small, thin, all bones and hunger and eyes too dark to hold moonlight. But he stood still in the wind, arms loose at his sides, head tipped to the sky like he was asking it something it hadn't been asked in a long time. Then, he howled, tore through him like memory, like birth, not a perfect sound, but his, ragged, cracked, wild, unmarked, unbroken. And in the wind that followed, there was a voice, not loud, not real, but true. Don't fear the pain. Don't fear not being believed. The boy staggered a little. His throat burned. His eyes blurred. But he did not fall. Because on the ridge across from him, where the rock curved like a blade too old to cut, someone stood. Broad-shouldered, weather-scarred, silent as dusk. Kade. No sash. No crown. No title. Just a man, older now, with streaks of white in his hair and something softer in the corners of his gaze. Something not softened. He didn't speak. But when the howl faded, and the stars blinked like breathing things, he smiled. A small thing. Crooked. Tired. Holy. I heard you, Kade said, and the wind carried it back. Far, far behind him, tucked into the cliffs where the altar had been carved, where stone had swallowed Auren's last breath, the air shimmered faintly. No body, no grave, just a place. And when the boy lowered his head, shivering but proud, he didn't feel alone. He felt watched, not with eyes, with memory. He turned, and for a single breath of time, too thin to speak of, too long to forget, he saw them. Not fully, not clearly, just two figures, framed in the ghost light of memory. A silver-eyed Omega, a scarred Alpha, standing on opposite ends of a wind-carved rift, bound by no mark, no rule, no name, looking at each other, not touching, not needing to, because in that last breath the world had become theirs, not through power, not through law, but through every wolf who would howl and not bow, through every voice too raw to sing but too stubborn to stay silent. And so the boy howled again, not for them, with them, and somewhere in the deep dark, Auren Thalosar did not come back, but he arrived.